This is a test. This is a test.
Good morning, everybody. Welcome to this first meeting of the new Council's Strategy and Resources Committee. A particular welcome to all the new members and lots of, there are some people I'm very, very pleased to see here, one of whom is Elisa. It feels very strange not having you here, Elisa, and I'm also very relieved that I haven't failed to pass on a message and that you got a lift, so it's all good. I am going to hand over to Michelle to do minutes, apologies, and notification of Chair and Vice Chair.
So the first item is the notification of Chair and Vice Chair. It's a constitutional requirement that we report the decision made by Council to appoint Councillor Nessinger as the Chair and Councillor Dupre as the Vice Chair for the municipal year 2025-26. And whilst I've got the mic, I've got apologies from Councillors Bowden, Goldsack and Murphy, and Councillor Wyatt is here substituting for Councillor Murphy today.
Thank you. And I think as this is the first meeting of the new council, we will start by going around the table and councillors introducing themselves. I think probably for officers, please come and sit down, Michael. You're very welcome. If you could just introduce yourselves as you first speak, but we'll go round for councillors just to say who you are and where you're from. And I'll start with Robin, if that's okay.
Hello, I'm Councillor Robin Wyatt. I represent St Neots, Priory Park and Little Paxton.
Hello, I'm Karen Young. I'm a councillor for Queen Edith.
I'm Graham Wilson. I'm County Councillor for Godmanchester, Huntingdon South.
Alison Whelan, Councillor for Ely North.
I'm Ros Hathorn. I'm County Councillor for Histon and Impington, which is in South Cambridgeshire, just to the north of Cambridge City.
Hello, I'm Alex Beckett, Councillor for Market Division in Central Cambridge.
Lucy Nessinger, now Councillor for Camborne.
Lorna Dupre, Councillor for Sutton in East Cambridgeshire.
Ross Martin for Warwick and Stukely, so you're currently in my division.
James Sidlow, Councillor for Ramsey and Berry Division.
Ricky Ioannidis, Councillor for St Neots, Amesbury.
Elisa Meschini, King's Edges, Cambridge City.
Elliot Tong, County Councillor for Abbey Division in Cambridge City.
Thank you all very much. And it's very good to have you all here. And I hope we will be a good Strategy and Resources Committee. I will now return to my script and say that the County Council allows filming and photography at its meetings, so feel free to take pictures and use social media during the meeting, but please could everyone turn their phones to silent. This meeting is being live streamed and a recording of the meeting will be available to view on the County Council's website. There is no fire alarm test scheduled for today, so if the alarm sounds, I will adjourn the meeting and we will leave via the side doors and use the fire escape next to the kitchen to make our way to the assembly point in the car park. We've done apologies for absence. Declarations of interest. Does anybody have a disclosable interest to declare for this meeting? I see no indications, but if anybody realises later that they should, there is, feel free to declare an interest at any point during the meeting. We will move to item 3, which is the minutes and the action log. We are being asked to approve the minutes of the meeting and the special meeting of the committee held on the 11th of March as an accurate record. If any member does not agree, could you raise your hand now? I see no hands, so I will sign those in a moment. And then we will move to the action log. An action log is included with the published papers for this meeting. Most of the actions are completed with 2 ongoing and an explanation provided. Are there any questions on the action log? I don't see any questions, so that's very helpful. We will move to public questions and petitions. We have received no petitions or public questions for this meeting. So we will move to item 5, which is the Integrated Finance and Monitoring Report. Welcome, Stephen. Over to you.
Thank you, Chair, and good morning, everyone. I'm Stephen Howarth. I'm the Head of Finance here. So this first report presents the consolidated management accounts of the Council for the financial year 2024-25. These reports are presented to most meetings of this committee, giving a comprehensive overview of the Council's financial position, covering the revenue budget, the capital programme and the balance sheet, and usually including some recommendations for decision regarding some aspects of the committee's financial functions. This overarching report is based on Directorate Finance monitoring reports that are typically seen by the other policy and service committees ahead of presentation here. So to summarise, first on the revenue position, through this report and subject to the recommendations here being agreed, we report that for 2024-25, the Council saw a revenue overspend of £4.4 million or 1% for the year. In 24-25, the Council saw significant financial pressures from several demand-led services, particularly those that support children in care and for people with learning disabilities, and in home-to-school transport services. Those pressure areas are similar to those in many councils nationally. To take an example, the cost rises we've seen in Cambridgeshire for residential placements for children in care with very complex needs have been severe and are due to a national shortage of placements that all councils with those responsibilities are competing to fill. The Council also saw lower than expected income on several key revenue sources, and the report sets out in some detail the main cost drivers across the whole Council. In the year, those pressures were mitigated to an extent through lower than expected growth in demand for older people services and through additional government funding above the level budgeted for. This year-end position is reflective of pressures that have been reported to committee consistently throughout the year, with issues discussed at length previously, but it's encouraging that controls and mitigations brought an improvement from a much higher forecast outturn position earlier in the year in the autumn. Given that we end the year with an overspend that's lower than expected when the medium-term financial plan was set for the coming period, the general reserve from which overspends are financed is higher than anticipated, which recommendation C to you proposes to transfer to a more specific reserve. Recommendation B, the committee is asked to agree some transfers to and from earmarked reserves at year end. Transfers into reserves generally match ring-fenced funding sources with spend profiles, while drawdowns from reserves generally meet one-off costs or unbudgeted costs from that one-off funding source of reserves. Lastly, on revenue, the Council's dedicated schools grant-funded budgets, which provide funding to schools, to early years settings and support for children with special educational needs and disabilities, overspent by just under £23 million for the year. That is a ring-fenced deficit under current regulations, and with the cumulative deficit relating to several years having built up now to just under £63 million deficit. Again, that is a national major issue facing councils, with funding for responsibilities not keeping up with entitlement for services. And it's a major risk to this council, and recent announcements from government really just delay that rather than providing a resolution. Turning to the capital programme next, and probably more briefly, the Council delivered much closer to its programmed commitments in 24-25 than it has for many years. Due to historic performance levels on capital delivery, a degree of slippage is built into capital budgets, and by delivering closer to specific scheme commitments, particularly within highways and infrastructure, the capital programme ended the year in a net overspend position, but within the gross budget envelope allocated to specific schemes. Through the next item on the agenda, we propose to reset that slippage assumption to match updated performance levels. Recommendation A before the committee relates to a technical accounting treatment of certain grants, allowing for a temporary displacement of borrowing funding for capital schemes with a consequent short-term saving to the Council, which is an approach that has been taken here for a number of years at year end. I won't make any further remarks on the balance sheet, Chair, beyond what I've said already, and bearing in mind the Treasury Management report later on in the agenda. And finally, just to say that as we speak, the statutory financial accounts which accompany these management accounts are being prepared and will be considered at the next meeting of the Audit and Accounts Committee. But I'll leave the intro there. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much indeed, Stephen, sorry. That was admirably brief for an enormous amount of work. There are quite a lot of things that I will probably say about this, but I'll come to questions first. Are there any questions for Stephen? Yeah, Elisa.
This is probably going to turn out to be a lot easier than you think, Stephen, but whilst I understand the basic concept, I found it only very slightly odd to have an overspend lower than budgeted for. Are we budgeting for an overspend? And if so, what's it being spent over if we're budgeting for it?
That's a very good question. It may relate to my use of terminology a little bit. So when we come to set the coming medium-term plan, which is usually sort of in the autumn time, at that stage, we will be forecasting an outturn for the year. In the case of 24-25, we were forecasting an overspend. I can't remember the specific level, but it was higher than the outturn position. Because overspends are financed from the general reserve, that forecast outturn is built into then our reserve projections. And Michael Hudson, as the Section 151 officer, in setting the medium-term plan, sets a minimum level for that reserve. If the overspend would draw that reserve down below its minimum level, through the business plan, we would have to build that reserve back up to its minimum level. With the outturn being lower than expected, that reserve is not drawn down as much as was anticipated.
Do you want to have another go at that, Michael?
As an accountant to an accountant, that was a perfect answer. So I will have a go from that steer. So back in January, this committee had a report from me entitled Financial Sustainability. At that point in time, the overspend was just over £6 million. And the level of general fund reserves that was required for the current year that we're in, 25-26, was deemed just over £26 million. That meant that an overspend in 24-25 of £6 million would have taken the general fund reserves below the £26 million level, and therefore in 25-26 we would have introduced a further pressure to the business plan as was set by council in February, because that £2 million shortfall would need to have been recouped so that general fund balances remained at £26 million. With the overspend coming in at £4 million, that's at a level that was able to be funded from the general fund reserves without asking for any more. So if in your personal life you're saving up for a holiday and you maybe have your boiler and you've got £10,000 and you know that the holiday is going to cost you £6, if the boiler costs you £4, you're all right. If the boiler costs you £7, you'll have to make some more savings before you can go on holiday. That's hopefully helpful.
Thank you. Elisa, are you happy with that?
I think happy is a bit of a big word, but we'll do for now.
Thank you. Graham.
In which case, Michael, can I ask about savings and the savings tracker on page 35? It refers to black savings which weren't achieved of £10.7 million. Now, I accept what it says in 2.3.3 about a number of black savings are related to adult social care, which have been offset by identified mitigations. But could you tell us a bit about all the other black savings, why they weren't achieved, and whether or not they're rolled forward into the current financial year 25-26? Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Wilson. If members in their pack have pages 67 onwards, that's Appendix 3. That is the detail behind the savings tracker. And in a number of cases, there are instances where they are rolled forward. In some cases, they were resolved in the business planning process in terms of deemed to be savings that were no longer felt appropriate, or for which action, a mitigating action had been taken. So there is a mixture within those. So, for example, in my own area, I've got an ongoing requirement relating to buildings around the county. A number of those have been or are going through the process of sale in this year, so they remained and were therefore rolled forward. In some other cases, for example, around adults, they weren't, because alternative policies have been brought forward. But pages 67, 68, 69, 70, 71 and 72, I think, goes on 73, 74, they cover the detail of each of those without going into the exact individual ones.
I accept all of that, and they are listed as you describe. I'm just concerned there seem to be an awful lot of them, and it's and now at the end of the financial year that we begin to realise what the magnitude is. So I think that's just something which we need to note for future years.
Thank you again, Councillor Wilson. You will note from a following item that this is something that will be picked up, I'm sure, in that as well. It is an issue that concerns me. It's an issue that obviously within that same statement I referred to earlier in the January committee, I give a statement around the robustness and the deliverability of the savings. A number of these savings are legacy savings. They are proposals that date back over 2 years. In terms of their deliverability, some of which have taken time to progress, some of which have worked out of the system, and some of which are still ongoing, as I described. And I think there are lessons to be learnt as we continue moving forward with the budget setting. What I am pleased to note is that despite that legacy, we have come to a position, it's still not ideal in terms of that 1% overspend, or just less than 1% overspend, but we are taking mitigation actions during the year. The budget monitoring and reporting that we do, and I think we're one of only a few councils up and down the country that is doing a P2 report, which is next on the agenda items, gives us that sufficient time in order to take actions and to consider this in terms of prudence. So we have demonstrated a strong position in terms of mitigations, but I would recognise that there is a worrying trend there that we need to address in terms of both our forecasting and assumptions around savings delivery.
Thank you. I suspect that is a conversation we will continue a bit later in the morning. Lorna.
Yes, a specific question and a general one. I'll go for the general one first. Is there a useful distinction to be made, and I'm quite happy for the answer to be no if I'm wrong, between the 2 or 3 different kinds of black savings? It seems to me there are some that are black, but it suggests that this is because of delays. And I'm thinking particularly of delays to income from energy projects, which will come in the future. It's just that it is a black saving in this year that we're discussing because it is a delayed income stream. And those that are black because, well, this one was never a goer. And I'm looking at the one about one of the highways ones about the depot in March, and it was like there's no room at the depot in March to do this stuff. It isn't a goer. We're not going to do it. We're dumping it. And is there a useful distinction to be made, at least at the level of lessons learned about financial planning, between those 2 different types of black saving? And should, without wanting to extend the rainbow too much, should we be looking at a kind of a grey saving for this is still potential for future years, but it didn't happen this year because. And the specific question, if I can find it, yes, is on page 76 of the agenda bundle, and it's the leisure park income generation. And it says that rental increase is not as expected, and managing and marketing the empty units, extensive marketing is underway. Does the extensive marketing to try to chase that income cost us? Presumably it does. And are those costs of chasing the income that hasn't naturally materialised rolled into the financial figures on that line, or is that an additional cost that is accounted for somewhere else?
So thank you, through you, Chair. So in relation to the first part, yes, I think as I referred to earlier, there are legacy positions which have taken a number of years to deliver, be it around accommodation or around energy, that maybe there was some over-optimism in the assumptions that were based around the delivery of that, of which have taken forward in terms of learning. I would include the leisure park one that I'll come on to in a second. Some of that is caused by external factors that change following that. And then there are others, if I refer and keep members so they're not flipping about pages, on page 76, in terms of the property facilities management, where some of the assumptions changed in year due to some of the condition surveys worsening, which meant some of the work was necessitated to maintain and keep our buildings open. So sometimes assumptions will change, and the desire and the hope is that they are on the smaller level of savings. Unfortunately, what we experienced was a number of the larger savings were in that category. And then the other area I would draw council's attention to is some of the demand assumptions, particularly around care, where whilst significant action was taken to check, challenge and improve demand and costs within those systems, there were still then new cases that were coming through. So it's a kind of cost avoidance, but it's been matched with other costs that have come into the systems. So I think in every instance there is learning, and we should do that learning, and we should do the same for the year that we're currently in. And members through the service and policy committees as well should be thinking about that in terms of challenging future savings delivery, as I will be doing through the robustness of the process. So absolutely, there are different black saving lines there. I would say there are some purple, maybe, I don't know, in terms of extending that rainbow, where we see some of the savings are over delivered as well, and we mustn't lose sight of those in terms of they help then to mitigate in terms of some of the savings where we are able to achieve those. And again, sticking on the same page, the reduction, for example, in the bad debt provision was overachieved because of the work that we did, particularly targeting our organisational and particular adult care debt. So there are significant improvements there, and we call those blue, but some of those have exceeded massively in terms of that element. Just turning to the leisure park income, yes, we do have agent fees, and we have fees incurred in terms of the units themselves. They're factored into the overall return for the site over the long period of holding, and we monitor that and report that through the Asset and Procurement Committee reporting as well, and that's a challenge there. So it is within these figures.
Thank you very much, Alison.
Thank you. Just wanted to pick up or get a little bit more information, a little bit more understanding. On page 29 at 1.2.2, one of the areas says, second bullet point there, of pressure on our legal budget due to the number, length and complexity of court proceedings. Very often I find that the reason why you end up with legal fees of any description is because there is something else which is wrong. Is that the kind of nature of what we're seeing here, or is there some other reason why these are there? One of the reasons I have a concern is that other interactions I'm having with the council, particularly around section 106, contributions seem to take for absolutely ever to get a response to, and I am really concerned about the quality of the legal advice that we're actually getting on here, and whether we're getting the correct value for money if we're getting comments like that, which is quite a few of them throughout this report.
Through you, Chair, thank you to Councillor Whelan for the question. The pressure on the corporate legal budget, so for those members who are perhaps less aware of the history, the Council centralised its legal budget, having previously had those costs apportioned across each of the directorates. The second bullet point in paragraph 122 specifically refers to the pressures created on the corporate legal budget as a result of the children in care and care protection cases that are from our Children's Social Care Service. So the pressure on the budget is directly related to the demand and the number of children we are having to support through child protection plans and safeguarding arrangements. To the second point, however, of Councillor Whelan's question and comment, I think it would be fair to say that, as some members may have heard me previously say, I think the time is now ripe for us to revisit our current arrangements with the entity known as Pathfinder Legal Services. That was something this council helped establish historically, and through our Director of Legal and Governance, we are beginning to look at how we might move forward with different legal arrangements in the future. However, we need to do that in a way that doesn't lose the experience and expertise that sits within Pathfinder. And I'm also conscious we are tied into a partnership arrangement with at least one other council who receives services from them as well. So without wanting to be the person that constantly, I feel like Spectre at the feast, I constantly mention this in every meeting, don't I? Local government reorganisation. I think the time is opportune for us to revisit our legal services provision in readiness for local government reorganisation, but also recognise that there is greater benefit to us having our legal service in-house in terms of knowledge, experience, and the advice being rooted in the needs of the council rather than at arm's length in the current form. So two essential points. One is around demand on children's social care and court proceedings. The other is, do we have the right legal service? Question mark. Thank you.
Thank you. Very helpful. Ross.
Thank you very much, Lucy. Just a couple of questions, but I'll ask them separately if that's okay. To start off with, obviously, county councils and higher tier authorities are struggling at the moment, and they do have significant financial pressures. So seeing an overspend while being disappointing isn't unexpected. And I think the council's in a relatively good place in comparison to other authorities. But what I am concerned about particularly is the forecast from Q3 to the Q4 outturn having a 1.8 million variance. So a question to the finance team is, why did we see such a big variance in between Q3 and Q4? Now, I accept, although I don't agree, if it is just financial prudence that we kept it in there just in case, because it's better to be safe than sorry, as the saying goes. But at what point in the year did we realise that we were going to have a variance of 1.8 million to the outturn of the overspend?
So the graph on page 33 of the pack shows sort of the history of the forecast outturn over the year. It does show the forecast dipping down sort of at year end in March as opposed to any earlier. So there's no sort of just in case held in the forecasts, certainly when you get to the back end of the year. So you can see from the committee can see from the way the lines dip on that graph that it was concentrated across a lot of the council's directorates. It wasn't a major variance or a swing at the end of the year in a given service that was missed. It was several of the key demand-led services, adult health commissioning and children's education, families in particular, dipped down a bit at year end. So just the final outturn, again, reflecting some mitigating actions that were able to be put in place, just dipped down below what was forecast through the remainder of the year.
Thank you for that answer. And then just moving on to Appendix A under the savings. It's business plan reference BR 6.009, mental health, residential and community. I note in the forecast commentary, it says the assumptions in the original business plan was disproven. It'd be useful to get a bit more information about how it was disproven, why it was disproven, and how we were so wrong in the first place. And more concerning to me is that we've still managed to save £40,000 in year. Well, if our business plan was disproven and was significantly wrong in the first place, it's a concern that we're still saving money. And are there any potential unintended consequences of that saving of the money if the business plan was significantly wrong? So it would have been useful to get a bit more of an insight into that commentary, considering it is serious, saying that our business case or our original business case was disproven to such an extent.
I have a feeling that might. Oh, go on then, Stephen. It's fine.
Maybe other officers want to follow up, but I suppose the business case will have been predicated on, I think this was relating to sort of reducing reducing growth in demand for services as opposed to reducing costs. Many of the savings within adult social care and children's to a degree are around reducing growth in the budget, because we budget for an extensive amount of growth and we, through savings, try and reduce that growth. So that is obviously predicated on a lot more assumptions than a cost reduction saving. So I think the reference to the original business case refers to some of the underlying assumptions having changed or not matching reality when you get into the year. The fact that some saving was made will reflect that work is always ongoing to mitigate savings delivery where there's a pressure or the original savings plan is not viable. So a certain degree of saving will have been and was suggested to be delivered, but as it says, the original intention wasn't possible in practice.
Patrick, do you want to just talk a little bit more about the complex things that went on in the adults and health budget last year?
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Good morning, everybody. I'm Patrick Warren Higgs. I'm the Executive Director for, excuse me, Adults Health and Commissioning. So if I'm correct, I'm at the top of 68 on that saving line, BR 6.009. Is that the correct one? So that one is actually linked to one which is on page 67, which is around mental health supported accommodation. So we did a piece of work on supported accommodation and on residential and community spend within mental health services. And our expectations at the time were that we would make some savings by recommissioning and recontracting. Some of that has had an impact because the opening of the framework, which around the way we buy some of our services, didn't manifest itself in that particular year. But what we're pleased to say is with some further work with providers, we've reopened the framework a second time and got significantly more providers. So we are hopeful that in 25-26 that the further savings will be delivered than we'd originally intended to be. But our expectations when we first opened the framework in 2004-5 wasn't proven, which is why that statement there, it's probably not too clear in the description, but that was one of the reasons why it was all linked around the residential and the supported living frameworks, which were two separate lines, and they weren't delivered to the expectations that we wanted to be. But we're hopeful that we will achieve some greater savings this year. Whether we'll achieve that full amount, though, is still dependent upon the levels of business that we make.
You happy? Excellent. Thank you. I don't see any further hands. So I'm just going to make a couple of comments myself and then we'll move to the recommendations. The main one I want to do is to say an enormous thank you to both our finance staff, but also staff right across the organisation who put in an absolutely phenomenal amount of work at in the second half of this year in order to try and keep the budget overspend to the level that it was. And I know that there were very, very tight financial controls in the second half of the financial year to try and bring the predicted overspend back down to the level that it is. So I would like us to note my thanks to senior staff, but also to staff right across the organisation, some of whom I think have had to put up with some controls that I'm sure they found very tedious, but actually make a huge difference. So thank you for that. The other thing that I want to say is that I think it is becoming sadly relatively normal that the council is having to set its budget in a kind of constant period of uncertainty, and that has again been the case this year. Some of that uncertainty has been quite welcome in that the slightly surprising upside of not having had quite as much in the adults area has been extremely helpful, but it has, however, been offset by continuing very high price rises in children's social care and in home to school transport. And I think those are continuing to be a huge problem, and we'll probably talk about them in the next paper. I think the continued level of inflation and interest rates is also something to be continually concerned about. The final thing I want to mention is the statutory override for the SEND costs, where while I am very relieved that the government have extended the statutory override for 2 years, because to have not done so would have been catastrophic, actually they're just kicking this can down the road again, and it is causing considerable and continuing problems for upper tier councils who've got these very high levels of overspend. with no way of bringing them down because our safety valve programme is effectively paused because the government are not spending on the special schools that were part of that programme. We are not allowed to fund that deficit from any other mechanism. We are having to fund the interest rate on it, and it is causing us huge problems. So in other places, I will be making that case pretty forcefully, and I will just mention it here as a continuing pressure on our budget, and the frustration around that is pretty huge. But I think the most important thing was thank you to everybody for all the efforts that went into keeping this within the level that meant we could fix the boiler. And I don't think anybody's actually going on holiday. It just means that the crisis that we're facing is not quite as bad as it might be. On the other hand, we've got the next paper coming up. So I'll pause there. Thank you very much indeed for all the work, Stephen. I'm just going to find the recommendations. So we've got recommendations A, B, and C. I haven't heard anybody speak against any of them. Are we happy to take those as a block and without any indications against? I think can we take those as carried unanimously? Ricky.
So, Chair, I support the prudent use of reserves where it can be clearly linked to protecting vital frontline services and delivering measurable outcomes. But my concern is if we're repeatedly internally rebalancing without any district level impact clarity, then I think it kind of undermines its transparency to the public. I mean, the public want to know where this money is going. If we're continuously overspending and we're having to prop it up with continually internally rebalancing, then you know, the residents are going to be disparaged about where this money is going within their geographical areas. So I think they'd like to see what they're gaining in return for, you know, their overspends and the use of the limited council reserves. So therefore, can I request the officers compile a report detailing directorate funding and overspend per capita and by district so that they can be scrutinised and made available?
I suspect that would have a considerable cost all of its own to do that work by district and per capita. I will come to Michael, who might comment on that.
Yeah, thank you, Chair, through you. In terms of the overspend, the report sets out those areas that overspent as well as those that underspent. So it has a clear and transparent indication of the levels of demand or cost that was incurred in terms of maintaining the services, including the statutory services that council needs to deliver. In terms of the request made, in terms of the way that funding is distributed between the services, we do have per capita data, but it's something that in terms of having any comparative to look at, we would not have any indication, and I'm not sure what the indicator would actually show. In terms of for a district element, we don't account for that wave. You can imagine the complexity of the hundreds of thousands of transactions that are going through and identifying those to a district geography, and they are purely random and will change month on month, year on year between what highways is necessitated spend or which area an adult comes from or a child comes from. Or the level of waste disposed of is very difficult. So the actual compilation and gathering of that, and I have been asked this in my 22 years several times, would just be so expensive it would not be possible to collect that data.
Thank you for your answer. It's just that I think I don't know how I can be asked to support something if I don't know where the money's going. That's the bottom line to what I was asking. I mean, I'm happy that, you know, we do need to fund services, but I mean, I can't see where the money's going. So, I mean, could someone possibly answer that question?
Michael.
Chair, if I may, and I'll share it after the committee. There's a very helpful diagram that was actually first generated by Stephen Howarth there, which shows a flow of the money between the sources and the relevant services, and also the medium-term financial plan. All of this was reported to this committee in January, and then the papers held within the February Council decision. So I'll share that afterwards, and I think that's the best trail that I've ever seen. And also the medium-term financial plan contains some of that per capita spend, and importantly reflects some of the lower funding for Cambridgeshire.
Fantastic, thank you.
Thank you. I believe that some of that information was also included in the member induction programme, but I'm sure it would be happy to be shared again. Does that mean, Ricky, that you would prefer not to be supporting these recommendations?
No, I'm happy with that answer.
Okay, in that case, I think we can take the recommendations as carried unanimously. So thank you very much, everybody. We will move on to item 6, which is the Integrated Finance and Monitoring Report for period 2 for this year, which I think is Stephen again.
Yep, thank you, Chair. And following on from the previous report, this report turns now to the new financial year, 2025-26. It's important for me to stress at this stage, which is period 2 of 12, that the report is mainly about forecasting and best estimates rather than concrete information at this stage. But nevertheless, at period 2, the Council is projecting a pressured position of a revenue overspend for the year of just under £15 million, or 3%, based on the information that is available to us at this stage. If that materialises, that would be a substantial overspend, but given it's been identified early in the year as a risk, there's now a strong opportunity to address that through mitigating actions with much of the year remaining. In many respects, the drivers of the overspend are similar to those in the previous year. We've got things like the cost of placements of high-need children in care and the cost of homeschool transport contracts having exceeded growth estimates already, and are again seen by many councils nationally linked to national supply chain issues. As I say, those are budgeted to grow by more than expected. Expected to grow by more than budgeted for, I should say. We've also seen the emergence of several new cost drivers this year so far since the budget was set, including reduced income from the NHS for joint funded care services for people with learning disabilities, and increased capital financing costs linked to some of the council's investments. A certain level of risk was anticipated when the budget was set, and consequently around £10 million of funding risk funding was allocated in the budget and has already been applied, and that can be seen in the corporate and funding items line in the summary tables. At this stage of the year, this is mainly a warning about the direction of travel if further mitigating action isn't taken, and therefore directorates are focusing on developing and implementing those actions. We're also looking at some lessons to be learned in terms of the budget setting process, given this is quite a big variance early on, but bearing in mind that there are some months between budget estimates being made and the start of the year, so things can change. So an example of that, we had anticipated that interest rates were going to go down towards the back end of last financial year, and that didn't really happen as quickly as expected. Consequently, the projections this year are worse for our capital financing. But we'll build any lessons that are learned into budget setting for next year as well. Covering some other areas, the dedicated schools grant will continue to be a pressure this year, following on from the Chair's comments at the end of the previous item. So the table at 2.2.2 on page 108, which has a wrong reference to 24-25, projects a growth in that deficit this year of just under £26 million, which would take the cumulative deficit even higher. One aspect of the revenue budget I do want to draw committee's attention to, and is subject to recommendation C, is a proposed settlement of some legacy funding uncertainty with the local NHS Integrated Care Board. So contributions by the ICB to pooled budgets, particularly around the learning disability pooled budget, weren't agreed in 24-25, leading to a significant debt accruing that was owed to the council. Following some detailed discussions, the council and the ICB are ready to confirm what contributions should have been for that year, and delegation is requested through this report to finalise that and deal with the revenue impact. Turning to capital, the report presents the outcome of an annual process to review and reset the phasing of capital schemes in the budget to reflect latest information following the end of the financial year, and again reflecting the budget estimates are a few months old by the time the year starts. It asks that agreement is given to transfer unspent capital budget for several schemes from last year to later years, and generally reprofile schemes based on latest deliverability estimates. Again, it's a process that happens annually here. Several additional capital schemes or increases to capital schemes are also proposed at this point, and I'll draw committee's attention particularly to the schemes around essential busway safety works, which were endorsed recently by Environment and Green Investment Committee and are funded from a specific reserve. Finally, to draw committee's attention to schools budgets, which I don't think I mentioned in the last item actually, but they are under significant financial pressure as well as the sort of general council budget at the moment. And I'm mainly talking here about the council's maintained schools, for which we ultimately retain responsibility. So the number of schools that ended the last year in deficit increased compared to the previous year, and consequently a growing number of schools are struggling to set a balanced budget for the coming year or for this year. We work with our maintained schools to set recovery plans or try to, where they can't set a balanced budget in year, but where a deficit is over a certain level, agreement to do that and spread the recovery over several years is required by committee, and consequently a delegation is requested here to enable school budgets to be agreed as quickly as possible where appropriate when they're accompanied by a recovery plan. So, Chair, I've not touched on several of the smaller or more discrete recommendations in the interest of time, but hopefully the report is detailed enough, but I'll happily answer any questions on those. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much, Stephen. I'm going to go to Karen and then Alex.
Thank you, Chair. Speaking as a new councillor who's looking at reports from this finance team for the first time, I'd like to commend them on the comprehensiveness and the clarity of the financial information in them. I think it enables us to interrogate and ask the questions that we're asking today. It's a sign of great transparency, and I found it very comprehensive and great. So thank you very much for that. The other thing I would say is also a sign of a good functioning finance team that we do get this forecast so early in the year, warning us of potential overspend. So well done to the finance team for identifying it. My question, though, is really what are we going to be doing to tackle that forecast overspend?
Michael, do you want to take that one?
Thank you, Chair. As it stands at the moment, first point to note is the corporate items line that Stephen referred to there. One of the things that I'm keen to look at is the position within the individual directorates without trying to net that off, because we need to establish if these are recurring issues that we need to build into the budget planning process, or whether there is true environment that is needed or mitigating actions. So that is why unusually we've held the corporate items back at this stage to have that full and frank disclosure and discussion. I have met and we've been working through the finance team with the individual directorates to draw up mitigation actions. We have in place a workforce expenditure control panel, which has now been in operation for over a year, reflecting the position from the prior year, where all recruitments need to go through in terms of that approval process, having gone through a directorate approval. We also have a financial transparency panel, which I chair, which looks at the, in particular, third-party spending that is going through the directorates to ensure that first of all is in compliance with our regulations. And we had a report to the Asset and Procurement Committee a couple of weeks ago flagging improvements that are needed there, but also in terms of challenging the spend and identifying and directing the directorates as to what more is expected. So over the coming weeks and months, we will have a number of meetings as a corporate leadership team and extended leadership team to address this and mitigations to be brought forward. So I'm hoping by the next report you will see some changes and potentially decisions that are needed by this or other service committees as a result of that mitigating action.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Alex.
Thank you very much, and thank you very much for the report. Couple of things for me. Firstly, I think you mentioned the guided busway fencing. Obviously, it was think it was slightly mistaken there. It was Highways and Transport Committee, not Environment and Green Investment Committee on that one. So that's where that one went through. The bigger question though I had was around recommendation, is it H, which is about transferring £250,000 from the Bridge Maintenance Reserve to the Change in Digital Reserve. Now that originally obviously came from the motion to full council about Little Paxton Bridge, and it was transferred across to the Bridge Maintenance Reserve in order to fund improvements at Little Paxton Bridge to mitigate some of the flooding risks. That work has now been funded from the capital maintenance program, but my understanding was that the work that wasn't therefore being done out of the capital maintenance program was going to be funded from that money. So we'd essentially used that bridge money for bridge work that would otherwise have been done. So I'm slightly surprised to see it coming back here into the digital reserve. I wonder whether officers might be able to outline why that is. It looks from my reading of the finance tables like we've got about 4 million already in the digital reserve. So I'm just wondering what projects that's going to, because obviously within highways, I'm sure we can find some ways to spend it on highway maintenance that I'm sure we're all aware of we need.
I can see that Frank has appeared ready to answer that one. Thank you, Frank.
Okay, thank you, Chair, and good morning, members. I'm Frank Jordan. I'm the Deputy Chief Executive and Executive Director for Place and Sustainability. So just to clarify, the allocation from the Change in Digital Reserve to the Bridge Maintenance Fund was as a result of a motion, and the actual requirement of the motion was to consider the value for money for undertaking a feasibility study, and the Highways and Transport Committee were invited to review that. And the feasibility study was to explore whether it would make good use of resources to actually put a bridge over the waterway at Little Paxton. In March 25, the Highways and Transport Committee did receive a report which outlined the pros and cons in terms of undertaking that feasibility study, and also outlined other measures to alleviate flood risk in that particular area, which was based on engagement with local flood groups and other stakeholders. And as a result of that, the committee resolved not to go ahead with that feasibility study. Therefore, that funding that had been allocated from full council was agreed by Highways and Transport Committee that to be no longer required. And the alternative measures were agreed, and that was fully funded from the Highways and Transport programme and is in the budget for 25-26. And the other thing I would highlight is that part of those measures was to explore further feasibility studies to look at resilience of the road, particularly at Little Paxton. If as a result of that feasibility study there is a requirement to undertake further capital works, that will form part of the capital budgeting process for 26-27 onwards, or we may be able to make allocations from this year's budget, but that will only result from the feasibility study being completed. So I think that's just to clarify that the original reason the money was allocated, the request for full council was for the Housing and Transport Committee to review whether that should be required. That was a recommendation that was carried and agreed. Therefore, the funding is no longer needed, in line with the motion that went to full council. So that's to clarify the position there. Thank you, Chair.
Alex.
Yeah, can I come back and just ask you, Frank, can you clarify how much money is being spent in relation to works in Little Paxton Bridge and studies on other bridges, though?
So as per the report, it's all available in the report that went to committee in March. So there was a total of £250,000 worth of measures that were agreed to address flood resilience, not just in Little Paxton, two other locations. And that's the money that's been allocated in the budget for 25-26 from the Highways and Transport Capital Programme.
Thank you.
Thank you. So just to be really clear, the work is happening. This is just the finance stuff sorting itself out.
Yes. Can I just ask, so obviously it's going to the Digital and Change Reserve. Is it to be committed to any project, or is there anything to actually spend it on, or is it just going to be held in reserve?
There is a lot to spend it on, but I would like to just say, I think in the papers it talks about some of it potentially going to local reorganisation. I really hope it isn't needed for that, but let's see where we go. But there's plenty of digital work that it will be needed for. Oh, Stephen. No, Michael. Okay, and then I'm going to come to Ross.
Chair, what I would say, and again, I'll recirculate the whole report. Actually, the Section 25 report, January, for this committee did have a projection in terms of all of the reserves, and the change in digital reserve, or the digital and change reserve, change in digital, is due to be allocated and has commitments against it both in this year and in the future years, and will be extinguished, I think, 2027. So it's fully committed as it is, just as the guided busway is, and a number of others are.
I'm sure you'll be interested in the digital stuff, Alex. Ros.
Thank you. So 4.5 capital funding changes and 4.5.1 the table. Delayed schools seem to be very expensive. Is there any way of addressing that? I know it's complicated, but is there any way of them not having these financial pressures? Martin, I think that one's probably for you. Good luck with it.
Thank you. Are you talking about the schools that are in deficit, or are they talking about the special schools that are delayed?
Well, a number of schools, new schools being, but it's difficult because it's in confidential. It's the reference is in the confidential, but I think it's about new schools being built.
Okay, so a number of new schools being built are being delayed in part by decisions made by the Department of Education. And the Chief Executive has written to the Department to the Minister and the Department as well on behalf of the County Council and the residents to express concerns about that and the delays. We have not had a confirmation response detailing when those schools will be confirmed or when they'll be completed. So we know that the special schools are going to be significantly delayed, and as are other projects. So at the moment, we're at the mercy of the Department of Education for a number of those things.
Chair, through you, if I can just, so Martin's recount and response to Councillor Hathorn's absolutely correct. Even more contemporary information. So the correspondence we wrote received replies. I circulated at least one of those replies, which was relating to the free schools for SEND, but obviously the schools capital programme goes further than just the SEND provision. Regrettably, I was in a meeting with the Department for Education's Permanent Secretary, their most senior civil servant, last week. She was asked very precisely around when will we as councils hear more about allocation of school funding through the capital programme, because the department had placed a pause on the overall free schools programme to review it. Her response in that meeting to council chief executives was, I have no further information to offer at this time.
And I think we are all deeply frustrated about the lack of information that's coming, not only on the special schools that we were expecting to be being built, also on new school places that are needed in other areas, thanks to Department for Education decisions, and also the impact on our budget of simply rolling over the statutory override. All of those, I think, are huge problems for this council, piling on top of issues to do with home to school transport. I mean, it just the failure of government to address a number of issues that are really urgent in the sort of schools and SEND space are massive. Partly because I think it's important for the public to know that an awful lot of our home to school transport budget is about special school transport. Martin.
Just want to say, aside from Chief Executive's representations, officers make representations in every meeting they have with the Department of Education. We push for this strongly and advocate strongly for our residents on this. Also, if Councillor Hathorn, if there's other confidential matters, happy to come talk to you outside of this meeting and give you as much detail as you require.
Thank you. I think there are definitely some local issues as well. Thank you. Other questions, Ross?
Thank you, Lucy. A couple of questions again. So the first one, it is concerning to see in the capital financing pressures due to This Land company. What is the medium-term plan for the company, and is it financially viable, or is it just exposing the council? It looks like there's a lot of credit losses, MRP risk, and phasing of income, which is a big concern to me.
Through you, Chair. The shareholder subcommittee on the 24th of July will receive an updated business plan from this land that sets out the expectations in terms of the delivery of the schemes and the repayment of loans and interest. That will build on cash flow forecasts presented to the same committee in February. Whilst clearly we do have an interest in the viability of the company also has its own duties through its board and its directors to assess its going concern, and that it has done in terms of putting those business plans forward. I note the 23-24 accounts were signed off by the auditors with no concern in relation to that. We have regular monitoring through myself as shareholder representative reporting to that committee with the company in terms of its progress in the delivery of its programme. Over the last 12 months, we have also been working with our external auditors in terms of the classification of the loans and the impact of that in recognition of the ongoing need to keep a pace with prudential borrowing and capital rules. And as a result of a number of changes through those discussions, we've identified additional minimum revenue provision items as set out here, which were deemed likely in setting the budget and were therefore within the corporate items, so can be funded from that, as well as reserves set aside as part of the medium-term financial planning process, again agreed in February in terms of covering that. So we have been aware of this and have been planning for this to reduce any impact of that. The council has received £43 million worth of interest over the life of the company up to date, and did transfer at red book value £78 million worth of land, which it was able to then borrow against. So we've been able to maintain with the company the ongoing relationships and financial health checks and balances, and we'll be taking further reports on the progress in terms of accounting for that and how we need to do that in response to audit recommendations raised by KPMG in the 23-24 audit to the Audit and Accounts Committee on the 23rd of July, which will contain, as Stephen Howarth noted earlier, the statement of accounts, which will be published at the end of this month by the statutory deadline. So there'll be further reporting through both the Audit and Accounts Committee as well as the Shareholder Subcommittee, and there is further training provided for councillors as well during the next 4 weeks.
Thank you, Michael.
Chair, could I just ask the committee to note that I'm appointed as a council appointed director of this land? So just we'll have that noted on the record, please. Thank you.
Thank you. Ross.
And my second question is, so under the recommendations recommended to increase our prudential borrowing by £7.3 million, what assessment has been done for the future viability of that, MRP in particular, because obviously borrowing that money does have an impact on our revenue budget as well, not just in this year but also in future years. So it'd be useful just to know what impact we're expecting from that borrowing.
I'm not sure I can do the mental arithmetic in my head that quickly to say what the impact is, but it will be built or is built into the revenue forecast on the capital financing line and will be picked up as part of the business plan for future. So roughly speaking, the MRP, it'll be the cost of the borrowing divided by about 35 normally on average as the annual cost.
Thank you. Graham.
Thank you, Chair. And can I ask a couple of questions about the settlement on Learning Disabilities Partnership with the Integrated Care Board? On page 110, it talks about the Integrated Care Board will supply funding of 29.6 million for the pool in 24-25, This replaces the council's budgeting assumption of 31.57. So the first question is, are officers comfortable with that settlement? Is that it seems a fair settlement to me, but are they comfortable with that? And then earlier on page 106, I think it is, in 1.3.3, it says the main reason for the cost pressure is the costs of services for people with learning disabilities following the end of the pooled budget with health at the end of March 2025. So I just wanted to clarify what is the difference between how we used to do it and the settlement which we've achieved and these new cost pressures, because I don't think we covered that properly at Adults and Health Committee recently. Thank you.
Okay, I'm going to come to Stephen first, and then I think you hand on to somebody else.
Thank you, Chair. So Councillor Wilson's question, I'll deal with the first part, and then I'll invite Patrick to perhaps pick up the second part around current year pressures on learning disabilities. In terms of the settlement of the outstanding debt from the Integrated Care Board, yes, we had formal financial assessments of what were considered to be acceptable settlement figures from a county council perspective. The final offer made by the ICB was considered to be acceptable, bearing in mind, had we gone through with the formal legal mediation process, there was no guarantee of that funding being agreed, and also there would have been additional costs for the legal proceedings. So on the basis of what was offered versus the likely legal costs and the potential for having a worse outcome as a result of that process, we agreed that that was a reasonable position. I had that as a formal assessment provided by the Deputy Section 151 officer. So yes, I was content that we were in a position to accept. I also made sure that figure was equally signed off by the Director of Adult Social Services, who I will neatly hand over to give you your second part of the answer. Thank you, Councillor Wilson.
Thank you. So historically, the pooled arrangements that are referred to in the paper have probably been in place for 20 years plus, and they're literally as described. So it's a pool of money, contributions by the council and contributions by, well, it was then the CCG, I think it's now the ICB. So together we created a pool fund of which we all contributed to, and then care and support was provided for people, whether they had an ongoing health need, an ongoing social care need, or in some cases an ongoing health and social care need. So we would refer to those as joint funding. So when we came to the decoupling stage, we served notice, and we in September 2023, and we started to decouple. What it meant that every case that we were holding as a partnership, we needed to work out what the calculations were for who was responsible for the funding elements. So we agreed who was social care, we agreed who was fully funded NHS, and then we got to this large group of people who were joint funding, and that's where the discrepancies came between both parties. And some of that led to the differences in the overall debt position, which Chief Exec's just given you. From the end of the pooled arrangements at the end of March, the new arrangements are that individual bodies will now be responsible. So somebody who needs fully funded social care will be the responsibility of the council. Somebody who needs 100% health care will be responsibility for the ICB. And those people that still need joint care funded by both the social care and health, we will have to separately be responsible for those arrangements. So we will have a different arrangement with the provider, as would the NHS. And so the risk is that there are still people who we are in dispute with around the funding proportionate splits, which is why the size of the challenge for Adults Health and Commissioning this year is predominantly sitting within the LD space, because we haven't yet finalised all of the differences in the joint funding arrangements between the two parties. As they become clearer, that movement will change, and we've also got some other pieces of work to try and bring down the overall costs. But that's the difference between the pre-March arrangement, when it came out of a single pool, and a post-March when it's been separated out, and it's really just starting to look at the more detail around the social care elements and where we sit with those, which is why we reported such a significant financial challenge in that particular spend area. Is that helpful?
Yeah, that's helpful. I think I might follow that up with Patrick separately to try and understand what the benefit is for people with learning disabilities, because it's when you're getting health from one place and us providing out social care, it's confusing for them, and it will be even more confusing with the ending of the pooled arrangements, it seems to me, but I will check. Thank you.
I think that many of us might share your concerns, but nevertheless, from a financial point of view, the position that we have got to is I think as good as we could have hoped for a few months ago, and I'm grateful for the work that's gone into it. Stephen, I think you wanted to say some other things.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I'm conscious that this is the period 2 financial report for the effectively new financial year. First of all, just thank Councillor Young for her comments around the transparency of the report and the earliness of outlining the potential pressures and challenges in year, because that also means we have an opportunity to do something about them. Nonetheless, we closed last year with a 1% overspend, so clearly significant attention and focus is being paid to budgetary controls in year and making sure that savings that are agreed as part of the budget and business plan will be delivered. So that just builds on Michael's comments. The issue I did want to highlight, though, for members more broadly, and which is relevant in terms not just the outturn for the financial year we're now in, but in the years beyond, was the fact that the government formally launched its Fair Funding 2.0 consultation last week. This is quite significant in terms of local government finance reform. The consultation period will run to the 15th of August, and we anticipate there will be a policy statement from government in the autumn, which will finalise their position on local government funding arrangements, following which we'll get the provisional statement towards the end of the year. The reason I'm highlighting that to members is that that means there will be considerable funding changes in 26-27 onwards for local government, based on the analysis that some national bodies have undertaken on the government's consultation. There are some significant elements that are currently missing from the government's consultation or are not sufficiently specified. So things like business rates retention system changes, full council tax equalisation and the implications that that may create. But there are some positives contained in the government's consultation. So, for example, they are holding clearly to the proposing a 3-year settlement for local government, which would start for 26-27 onwards, which is the first time for some considerable period we will have a multi-year settlement for local government. Whilst that provides certainty, I'm not for one moment assuming it provides optimism, but it will make planning easier. Helpfully, though, in the consultation, given what we've discussed previously in Cambridgeshire, and particularly mindful of the impact on Cambridgeshire residents, the government is committing to use the 2021 census data finally, and will be using mid-year population estimates from 2023 for the purposes of resource allocation going forward. That's quite a significant shift from where we've been previously. As some members may recall, we've previously been using 2013 data in some cases from government to allocate funding. However, funding allocations over that 3-year period will be fixed. So once they're set, they won't be varied in the future years. So there won't be any further uplifts according to the consultation. So whilst we get potential certainty, we also have a situation whereby we may still be penalised as an area that continues to rapidly grow relative to other parts of the country. I guess the other points I just wanted to highlight in this consultation, which is why it's so critical for us to respond, whilst government has clearly been listening to some of the lobbying it's received, and there is some potential adjustment being made for rural areas versus urban areas, the detail of that is something that we'll want to carefully look at. And then some of the proposed simplification to funding arrangements is going to be quite important for us to understand the detail on. And that includes areas like funding for home to school transport changes, which could be potentially helpful. Chair, the final bit on the consultation I wanted to highlight, because this is material to not only 26-27 onwards, it's actually potentially material in this year for us working with our partners. Looking at the impact of what government is proposing in the funding review consultation, and of course it is a consultation rather than the final settlement, there will, based on what they've published, be a considerable shift away from inner London borough funding, not such an issue for Cambridgeshire, but a shift away from Shire District funding, which would be quite significant for the 5 shire districts we work with as an upper tier authority. So we need to be mindful of that implication, not only for our partners and their services, but particularly as we move forward with local government reorganisation and the consequences that that could create. So whilst I recognise this paper is around period 2 in-year financial monitoring for the County Council and outlines pressures we're facing, the financial context for the coming 3 years is likely to change quite significantly by the time we get to April 2026, and that will equally be the case for our partner authorities. So I thought worth saying. It's a bit like report the transparency position on the pressures in year, report the challenges in year as well as early as possible, so we at least have an awareness of them and can have a chance to think about how best to respond. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. And just that's consultation that is open now, so it will affect our budgets in the future years. Do I have any more questions on this? Lorna, did you want to ask something or not?
Hi, sorry, I don't want to bring back too much. I just want to get a little bit more clarification on Councillor Beckett's question from earlier about the £250,000 to the Bridge Maintenance Fund. I wasn't on the committee then, obviously, but can I just get some understanding and assurance of, given that the conversation at the time was to spend a similar amount of money, well, the same amount of money, on the new resolutions rather than the recommended one, why is the implication then that that amount of money goes back to the other reserve? Why do we not keep it as part of the bridge maintenance funds, given that we have existing expenditure?
Frank, do you want to take that, or do you want Michael to take it?
Well, I think I provided the clarification as to the reason why it was first allocated, the request of full council because of the motion, which was then discharged by committee, which was therefore funding no longer required for that particular purpose. But I wonder if Michael just outline, because that's now been discharged, what happens with the money after that process has been completed.
Yeah, I think I think it's paragraph 5.2.2 points out the original source of that funding was the change in digital reserve, and therefore that's transferred back into that pot.
Are you happy with that, Robin? Robin, do you want to abstain on that bit?
Yes, please.
That's fine. Okay, thank you. Elisa.
It's hopefully going to be relatively simple. I wanted to ask about recommendation B. Now, I understand that we've now got the value of the fine that we need to pay and the timescale where we need to pay it by. What I don't understand is whether we're actually moving any money in order to make that payment or not, because I was under the impression that we weren't. But there being a specific recommendation, it sounds to me like we're having to move money, and if so, from where is not very clear, because it's all coming from the major infrastructure reserve. So I don't understand that recommendation.
So because we know there is a liability coming in the future, this is treated as an accounting provision as opposed to a reserve. So we have already created a £5 million provision, I think it was last year, funded from the reserve. This adds £1 million to that provision funded from the reserve. So it's not moving money outside of the council, it's moving money from one part of the balance sheet to another part of the balance sheet.
Happy? Okay. Thank you. Ross.
Not a question, but just talking about the recommendations, much to the point of Councillor Becker and Councillor Wyatt. Apologies. By and large, I'm happy to support the recommendations that are in front of us. I am nervous about about borrowing such a large amount of money in year without it going through the budget process, but I accept why that needs to be done. But on H, as much as the money did come from the change in digital reserve, now that it's within the Directorate of Highways, and considering the condition of some of our roads across the county, I would not be able to support any recommendation that proposes moving money from highways into another pot. So I'm happy to vote on block A through G and then I, but H I will be voting against.
Thank you. That's helpful. We will take H separately. Any further questions? Ricky.
It's not really a question, but I'm going to be with Robin on abstaining at that on that point, because yeah, I mean, it's the same reason. I'm not going to get a different answer if I ask a question, so that's why.
Okay. Lorna.
Can I ask what the impact would be of deferral of of that particular recommendation?
Michael.
I mean, technically the item would stay within the existing reserve and wouldn't be transferred across to the change in digital reserve.
So there wouldn't really be an impact.
No, but it would obviously sit there as uncommitted at this stage.
If I could clarify, there's no impact whatsoever on delivery of works that have been agreed by the committee or the capital programme that's been agreed and set for this year. There's no impact whatsoever.
And the effect, if H gets voted against, that would effectively just mean that it did get deferred.
The money would sit within that pot and there would need to be commitments against that, and there would be an under commitment on the change in digital.
Alex.
Can I just clarify on that one then? So if that did happen, there is no call on the change in digital at this point that requires that money. So we could in future bring it back to change in digital if it was needed and there was a project that needed it at that point.
To clarify earlier statement, the change in digital reserve is expanded by 2027. So there are continuing pressures within the change in digital that would need to seek funding.
Given the uncomfortableness on H, I'm just wondering whether we don't vote on it and leave it for this time, and it can either come back for the next meeting or it can just be dealt with through the budget process. Would there be any reason? I mean, I can understand why you would rather it went through, but would there be any reason for not doing that?
I mean, reserves can be brought back to each committee as the requirement is needed. So as funding is identified, we frequently bring movements in reserves, as you see here, as we probably will for the next committee. So there is the opportunity to approve this here as the funding progresses. If there are further commitments in any areas, we can move reserves around, assuming that they fit within the overall envelope and the commitment allows.
So we could just defer that for a future meeting and it wouldn't have any direct impact.
It could be deferred or it could be approved, and if at then a future point further funding is necessary within the highways in this instant budget, then that conversation could be had and a further decision could come back in terms of identified funding. I note that there is additional funding that has come through from central government in this in the intervening time, so there are other funds coming within to highways that will need to be assessed. So I would suggest that as it's written, there are greater calls on the change in digital that have been identified at this present moment in time.
Elisa.
I mean, I'm sorry, but this seems a little bit silly to me. I mean, I wasn't on highways in March, but I'm looking, Madam Chairman, straight at somebody who chaired that committee. Now, when you voted not to use the money and to give it back, didn't you vote to give the money back, essentially?
I think I'm going to recommend that we don't vote on item H, that we just defer it to the next meeting because I think there's some confusion. I mean, I think Alex's understanding of what he thought was going on is slightly different from what this recommendation is saying. Given that I don't think there's any kind of urgency to have dealt with it before we meet again in September, I think we will just defer that item unless Michael can tell me that that's going to cause any real problems.
I think if we defer, we'll bring back spending proposals in terms of the outline for the change in digital reserve, as well as any other reserves that's impacted at that point in time.
Great. Okay, thank you. In which case, we'll just withdraw item H, I think. And we can vote on the others. Okay, thank you. Any further questions? No further questions? In which case, I think given that we've withdrawn item H, we can probably take them as a block. Can I see all those in favour of the recommendations not including item H? That's unanimous. Thank you very much. We will move on to item 7, which is the annual risk report. Mairead.
Thank you, Chair. So this is our annual report on risk management at Cambridgeshire County Council. The report summarises some of the key risk management activity that has taken place in the previous financial year, as well as providing an update on changes to the corporate risk register more recently. So in particular, in relation to the corporate risk register, which is attached as Annex A with Risk 8 in a confidential appendix, I would highlight several updates which are noted at section 5 of the annual report. In particular, risk 13, which was the risk that arrangements to support people with learning disabilities result in poor outcomes due to the uncertainty of decoupling of funding arrangements via the Section 75 agreement. The risk score for this risk has reduced from 16 to 10, and the risk has therefore been de-escalated from the corporate risk register with the agreement of CLT to the Adults Health and Commissioning Directorate risk register. You can find more information on the reasons that this risk has been de-escalated at section 5.5 of Appendix 1, which is the annual report. We also have a new risk, risk 14, which is the risk that the council's governance on health and safety is inadequate, which has been added to the corporate risk register with more information provided at section 5.7. Risk 11, the risk of failure of collaborative working, has increased its residual risk score from 12 to 16, with information on that provided at section 5.10. And risk 12, the risk that Cambridgeshire County Council is not adequately prepared for the impacts of the changing climate, has been reduced from 16 to 12. Again, more information is at section 5.11. Key things to highlight include the fact that we have had a risk maturity review carried out by our new corporate risk manager using a risk maturity framework from the Association of Local Authority Risk Managers, ALARM. And the outcomes of this review have been used to inform an update of our 3-year risk management strategy, which is attached as Annex B for the committee's review and approval. The annual report and the strategy itself also provide an overview of some of the actions from the previous iteration of the risk strategy, which have been implemented in the 2024 to 25 financial year. And then finally, just to note, we are also presenting the updated risk management policy at Annex C for the committee's approval. The key change is the updated approach to risk appetite, which has been discussed previously with this committee, and that includes defining both the council's maximum tolerable risk appetite and now working to define the optimum risk appetite for each risk area. So the key changes are set out at section 4.3 of the policy at Annex C, and the new Appendix D to the policy sets out more detail on the optimal risk position for each type of risk. Happy to take any questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mairead. This has always been a very popular item at this council, at this meeting so far. Questions for Mairead? Ross.
Thank you, Lucy. Again, a couple of questions. So thank you for the update on the risk maturity levels. What progress are we making to get the level 3s to level 4s and level 4s to level 5s? And how is that being monitored by yourself and by the directorates? Do you see progress within the next year, or are we looking at 3 years before we see any improvement in those levels?
Thank you. I think that if we look back to the previous risk maturity review, which was carried out in 2023, I believe, it used a different framework, so the two frameworks are not necessarily completely comparable, but I think we have seen a strengthening of the risk maturity across the council. When we looked at the maturity in different areas, there were a number of areas which were quite borderline between kind of a slightly lower and a slightly higher risk maturity. So I think we can see actually there's been a lot of progress with really embedding the risk management culture, really starting to see, as with this report, some of the risks escalating and de-escalating and seeing the impact of that risk management activity coming through to committee. You can take a look within the risk strategy. We've tried to highlight the actions that have been put in place over the past year, which hopefully demonstrates some of the key areas where that framework has been strengthened. And then the actions that we've planned for the next year should result in a further strengthening of the risk maturity framework, definitely.
Thank you very much for that answer. And on a similar point, how are directorates ensuring that the consistent application of the risk management toolkit, and then how is that being reported back to you and then eventually back to us to ensure that we can be happy that all the steps are being taken from the top of the organisation all the way to the bottom of the organisation?
Thank you. So there's a range of measures that we have in place already to try to ensure that there is that consistency of application. So at the CLT risk and assurance meetings, we at each meeting present a specific directorate risk register for CLT to do a deep dive within that risk register and look at how risks are being managed. We also regularly take a look at what we call red and borderline risks. So any risk within a directorate risk register which has a score of 15 or higher also again goes to CLT for that awareness of where risks may be emerging or about to tip over into a higher level of risk that perhaps breaches our risk appetite. At an officer level within the council, we have the corporate risk and performance group, which my corporate risk manager uses to communicate key messages about risk to officers who are involved in preparing risk registers and managing risk at that directorate level. The directorate risk registers are due to be reported to the relevant policy and service committees every 6 months or more frequently if there is a significant change in risk. So for members who also sit on other committees, you should be receiving those reports on risk management at that directorate level. And one of the actions that you will see within the risk strategy, I think it's within section 4, is around our new corporate risk manager starting to undertake some deep dives and assurance reporting around the directorate risk register reporting. So I think not only do we have some good measures in place already, but actually the new risk manager post will allow us to provide more detailed reporting at that directorate level as well.
And just to follow up on that, so that's really useful. Thank you very much for that response. And how are you assuring yourself that, as I said, from the lowest level to the top, that the risks are being reported adequately? Do we have peer challenges within teams to ensure that happens? Because obviously the concern is that we have staff now. I know that it probably doesn't happen, but there's always the risk that staff don't report something because they're concerned of potential consequences, etc. So how are you able to assure yourself that there is the adequate risk management going on, as I said, from the top to the bottom, other than the risk registers coming through on the directorate level to each committee?
So we have risk management is a key corporate policy. It is something which is a responsibility of our executive directors to manage within their directorate and for them to have those conversations, that challenge and review at their directorate management team level. So that is a key part of our corporate governance processes. And it's also something which our directors will consider when they are preparing both their annual assurance statements, which feed into the council's annual governance statement, and in reporting to the Audit and Accounts Committee on the implementation of key governance arrangements in their area. I am the head of risk management. I am also the head of internal audit, and that gives me a unique position in terms of if during an audit we see risk in a particular area, we will consider how is that risk being reported and escalated through the risk management process. That gives us an opportunity to identify any areas where perhaps that escalation isn't happening as we would like. And then most importantly, the role of our corporate risk manager. Again, one of the things that you'll see within the strategy is that we're very keen to re-implement a process of risk assurance reviews. So that will be reviewing individual risks at corporate risk register level, but doing that deep dive to establish, is the risk reporting accurate? Does it fully reflect the extent of the risk? Does it pick up elements of that risk across the organisation? Where we are saying we have controls in place to manage a risk, are those controls really in place? Are they operating as we would like them to operate? And so again, that's another key way that we can gain assurance over the operation of the risk management framework.
I think Stephen may have wanted to add something.
Thank you, Chair. So thank you to Councillor Martin for the questions. You've commented twice now, assurance from top to bottom. So from the top, I'm very clear that risk management is considered formally by the corporate leadership team as a collective on a quarterly basis. Any changes to the corporate risk register have to come through to the corporate leadership team for formal approval and sign off if they're outside that normal cycle. The risk register itself is reported as a whole, the corporate risk register, to this committee throughout the year and to the Audit and Accounts Committee throughout the year. And then finally, in terms of the assurance, whilst Mairead is quite rightly the author, and this report is very extensive and credit to her and the team, you'll note it's in my name because actually I own the risk register ultimately. Thank you.
Thank you. Ros.
Okay, sorry about this. Right. Possibly not a good way to start. So it feels to me like there is a risk there which I don't particularly see reflected. And I think there is a risk relating to how we, as part of government, as a big entity within a part of the political system, both as politicians and as a local authority, which with politicians, how we engage with the world. So, for example, we know, everyone here knows that there has been historic underfunding of highways maintenance, and we see that at a local level in our communities. We see that through broken gullies, whatever. And it comes to council and we discuss it. We try to find as much money. We try to find solutions or whatever, but there is never enough. And we never ever address that at a local level. Well, we do to an extent, but we don't. So people feel that things are broken, and in turn that feeds a narrative. It's not universal, but there is a big narrative that things don't work. You know, we always hope society would get better, but oh no, it's not. And actually there are loads of good things, but the world is really complicated. Complicated and difficult at the moment. And if we look to America, we witness this narrative of the system's broken, there's loads of waste, just cut everything. And we know we've gone through the budget reporting, and we know that there isn't the capacity. This council is really lean, and if you were to come in and massively cut it, it would be disastrous for services. And I just think that when we look at our reputational impact, it's all about if there might be any negative local media reporting. And actually, how we communicate the complexity is really important. And just quickly, because I'm really sorry. So I went to a lecture with Professor Sir David Spiegelhalter, you know, the national figure, and he was really criticizing how government talked about vaccination, because it said, you know, get vaccinated, save lives, whereas actually there's always a risk. And it's this sort of everything's simplified, you know. The risk register is very much, there is a project, it must be finished, but that complexity is really, really important. And I don't know what the solution is, but I feel it's not addressed here at all. Sorry.
I think probably that one might be a bit above Moraine's ability to answer. um, I'm going to come to Stephen because you have confessed to being the total owner of this document. But I also think it's really important that we remember that this is the risk register for our council, not for our country or for the whole planet. I think the point that you make about there being a risk to the council through people having a lack of faith in government services broadly and our services more specifically, and your point about vaccinations. I mean, we are the organisation that is responsible for public health, so that actually does sit within our kind of field. Is an important one. I think the risks that we're looking at here are often quite broad, and I think it could be said that that's probably covered in bits in all of those risks. But I'm not sure that it would be realistic for us to put a risk in for our council that chaos will continue, because I have a nasty feeling it will. I'm going to hand over to Stephen on that point. Good luck.
Thank you, Chair. So there are two elements within the council's corporate risk register, and I'll just be clear, the council's corporate risk register that might help. That would include risk 11 around failure of collaborative working, and certainly that speaks to some of the risks that are not just as a result of this council. You'll note that the risk scores actually also increased for this report. The other one that I would always highlight is risk 7, which is failure to deliver statutory services, which, as Councillor Wilson is very familiar with as the former Chair of Audit and Accounts. That's effectively our catch-all around the local level risks that we have. But then actually the bit that perhaps members aren't aware of is government itself holds a national risk register for the UK as a whole. The last national risk register was publicly released in January of this year, I believe, and that includes a whole range of things. Funnily enough, that includes things like, if I can quote a couple, not just things like the obvious, so global instability, some form of terrorist attack, cyber attack, or state threats. Actually, it goes on to a whole section that it considers to cover things like accidents and system failures. So, for example, one of those is major adult social care provider failure, which obviously could manifest at a local level, but because some of these companies are also national, they could well manifest at a national level. That includes other things like aviation collisions, even disruption of space-based services, although I can imagine that that's probably relatively low risk in terms of the UK's level of space-based services, other than satellite provision. There's a whole host of information in what is a 187-page risk register that government holds at a national level. I am very happy to circulate that to members because it certainly makes for reading that would cure any form of insomnia. But importantly, it will speak to some of the issues that Councillor Hathorn's raised. So I think my response would be there's what can we do within the bounds of the council? What can we cover as a corporate risk as this authority? And then how does that ultimately feed up to what might be considered a national risk for the government? I have to say, yeah, the government risk register is quite interesting, and if members sometimes think our own approach to risk management takes its time, glacial is probably the pace I'd outline government risk management responses. Thank you.
Thank you. That's very helpful. Elliot.
Good morning. Now, speaking with residents across Cambridge, I think the main thing that they are worried about is related to risk 3, the council's budget, and whether it can cover all the statutory duties it has. In this regard, reports about this land have been particularly concerning to people, specifically the auditor's comment, KPMG. Now, I don't feel fully equipped to comment on the situation with this land. There are a lot of reasons for this, but the county council has been quite cloak and dagger with quite a bit of information, some of which likely is justified, but I, having just come from the outside, don't feel that I've managed to absorb all the information yet. So I am approaching this a bit more like a person in a resident's position. I was wondering if I could get some detail on how the auditor's comments have actually factored into the risks related to risk 3, our budget.
I think I might come to Michael on that one. if that's all right.
Thank you, Chair. So I think the first point to note is in terms of transparency of data, clearly we are dealing with a commercial enterprise and there will be commercial information that has to be withheld for the sake of the company and its trading position. But where we can, we are looking to ensure that we do have information available publicly. And as I've referred to earlier, the shareholders subcommittee on the 24th will have further information in terms of the business plan. In terms of risk 3, we are looking at the significant impact of a number of triggers in terms of the council. As I set out in the previous reports, the council has set aside reserves and corporate items to fund a number of the changes that we're working through in terms of the accounting treatments, and therefore that has no further impact on the financial plan as it stands, and therefore whilst it is a factor and an ongoing factor that we'll monitor, it is not a significant one in terms of affecting the scoring of risk 3. Indeed, it's the former discussions we had in terms of the demand cost pressures and the delivery of savings set alongside the reserves, as well as the position in relation to the dedicated schools grant reserves in relation to the special educational needs and disabilities deficit that are far greater items in terms of the level of position. I think reported is 80 million plus in relation to that deficit. And whilst it is noted that the override has been extended till March 2028, that still remains our biggest pressure, whereas this land is already accounted for within the medium-term financial plan. But of course, we will continue to monitor that, just as we'll continue to monitor the social care demand or the waste disposal contract.
Thank you very much, Michael. Ricky.
Just touching on the response to the question regarding this land. So can I just clarify in simple terms, you don't believe that that's a risk now?
Through you, Chair, I would always say that in terms of monitoring and managing a commercial enterprise, there is risk contained within that. We are wholly own the company. The company is a housing development company, and that is a market that in itself is subject to risk. What I was referring to is we have a business plan, we have monitoring exercises and processes, so we are continuing to monitor the risk, and we can take action as appropriate depending on what happens. So we will continue to monitor that. But in terms of the trigger events, it is one of a multitude, but one that I'm satisfied as today we have coverage. Other areas such as the dedicated schools grant, we have no response for, and we're still waiting for action from the government in relation to that, for example.
Thank you.
Thank you. I'm going to Robin and then Alex.
Thank you. I have two questions, but one is just on the way we target our risks and how that is decided. There are a number, it looks like from what I can tell, and apologies if this is a stupid newbie question, it looks like we monitor and assess our risk on two axes, consequence and likelihood, but then cover it as a single number. But we also target it on the same two axes. And there are a few risks where the targets are in different boxes in the matrix, but in a way that feels like it could be reduced. So for instance, risk number 4, the target number has the consequence level of 5 and the likelihood level of 3, but the current state is that our consequence level is 4 and the likelihood is 3. What is the logic behind, if we have an assumption that it's possible for the consequences to be lowered, presumably through our actions, we are happy with the target that is a higher level of consequence? Is that just because of variation in different things? And then secondly, on that, following that, where there is a risk, because quite a lot of these are at a number of 15, which is very close to the point where we decide that they are untenable, how confident and satisfied are we at our ability to respond to those? So we have actions listed like to mitigate our current levels or to keep our levels where they are on target. But for instance, have we ran simulations where we say, okay, pretend this has happened, how do we respond? Because it's much easier to respond to an emergency when it's not actually an emergency. Like, how confident are we that we have the things in place to be able to execute on a sudden change in risk that is unpalatable?
Mairead, before you answer that, can I also add, Robin's drawn your attention to risk 4 and the fact that the target and the actual risk are in different boxes. When you're responding to that, could you also respond on risk 7, where they're also in different boxes and in a slightly surprising way, which I think is interesting and worth talking about. So if you could just pick that up at the same time, I would be very grateful. Thank you.
Thank you. In terms of the T for target, this is a bit of a legacy issue, so I've got to apologise to the council for this. We have swapped over our risk management system. The system historically has been programmed to show a T for target. That is due to be changed to an RA for risk appetite, indicating that 15 is the council's maximum tolerable risk appetite, and therefore anything above a 15 exceeds that appetite. When we display this on the matrix, it either needs to be a likelihood of 3 and a consequence of 5, or the reverse of that, but it's only shown in one box. So where you're seeing that T at a 15, that should actually be an RA for risk appetite. And we are working with our provider to try and sort that out in terms of getting that consistent reporting. There should also then be a T which is set to be the optimal risk appetite for each risk. So this is a new process that we've brought in. It's just been added into the risk management policy as of these papers, which we're asking the committee to approve. And the intention of that then is that we are clear that the council's maximum tolerable risk appetite is that 15, and wherever the residual risk score is 16 or higher, there must be an action plan to reduce that. And that then we are looking for officers to set their optimal risk appetites, which is that target, which should be below the maximum risk appetite level. For some risks, it may be appropriate to have a higher optimal risk appetite. For other risks, it will be appropriate for it to be lower. And at the Appendix D of the risk management policy, there are a set of statements which outline the council's approach to what is our optimal risk appetite for different types of risk. So sort of financial risk versus safeguarding risk versus commercial, etc. So that is an error in the papers essentially, and I apologise for that. In terms of the question around how confident is the council that it can respond to the actions, to the risks which are in excess of the risk appetite, that is down to the risk management process. So what we are looking for is where we have a risk score which is 16 or higher, we need to have that action plan in place. And the intention of the action plan is that it reduces the risk to a score of 15 or lower. And that is part of the purpose of this reporting and the reporting to CLT, to provide that scrutiny and review of those sort of emerging areas of risk and challenge to see how are we bringing those risks down. Now, what we can see in these papers is that risk 13 was previously at the last meeting that this committee received a risk report scored at a 16. That has been successfully now managed down to a score of a 10. So that is the sort of escalation and de-escalation that we are looking to see as the council actively manages its risks.
Thank you very much, Mairead. Sue.
I just wanted to pick up on risk 4, the question about whether we carry out simulations in anticipation of emergencies rather than just responding in emergencies. And just to assure you that over the last 12 to 18 months, we've increased our capacity in our emergency planning team. We've also trained up a new cohort of officers to operate at a tactical level, as well as having trained officers who operate strategically across the council. As part of that training, we do simulate issues and examples of things that could occur to the council, and we walk those scenarios through. We also have a responsibility as a council for certain plans as we work with our partners in the Local Resilience Forum. So the Local Resilience Forum is the coming together of all the key partners under the Civil Contingencies Act, so the Blue Light Services and health colleagues. So we come together and we will frequently simulate things too in terms of response to emergency. And one of the critical national simulations that we're going to be participating in this autumn is a simulation of a response to a pandemic off the back of the COVID-19 experience. So that's something significant that we're involved in. And as a county council, we're responsible for certain plans. So one of the things that we're responsible for are for plans related to hazardous sites, which might be chemical or industrial sites, where we work with that industry to pull the plan together. And again, we test those plans by putting them through simulation. So there are layers of simulation and exercising, some triggered nationally, some in relation to our responsibilities around plans, some in relation to ourselves as county council, and we have a programme of that activity as a forward plan that we take. So I hope that gives some assurance that we do what we can to prepare for eventualities. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Sue. Stephen, do you want to come on?
Just very briefly to add to Sue's comments, because she talked about strategic and tactical senior officers, just to reassure members that this council maintains a 24/7, 365-day-a-year on-call capability. That is both at gold or strategic level, which would be service director above, or silver level now, which is a head of service or above. We also have 24/7 on-call teams in specific areas like child protection, highways, communications, and of course the emergency planning team itself is always maintaining an on-call capability, because they have to provide the professional advice to people that may be responding either to an emergency that involves this council or indeed in the Local Resilience Forum arrangements alongside other partners. So I think in terms of the exercising point, I would just say that the it's a well-worn phrase in this space. The tempo of exercising has improved considerably over the last few years. I think it would be fair to say that for those members who are newer to the committee, one of the legacies of having uncoupled our shared arrangements with a neighbouring authority is the opportunity to be better placed to manage the response to such incidents, and having our own emergency planning team in the council again, as well as having significantly stepped up the training of officers to be able to respond to incidents, which was not where it needed to be when I joined in 2022. Thank you.
Thank you. I hope that's adequate, Robin.
Yes, it is. Thank you. I'm very encouraged to hear that.
Thank you. Alex.
Thank you very much. So to start with, I actually wanted to pick up on what Ros was talking about a little bit, which is interesting in that I think there is a really interesting difference between our role and officers' roles. We are elected to represent residents, so our fundamental responsibility has to be for the outcome of residents. And therefore, when I think about risk, I tend to think about risk in terms of resident risk rather than the council risk. And the council risk kind of becomes a chain and comes down the line to residents, but there is actually that kind of journey in between. The biggest risk to me is, a resident being hurt, or, there being, issues along that area, and that then you move up the tree becomes a risk of adult social services, the risks around adult social services. And it's an interesting one to try and map those between them, and for me to try and understand that mapping between them. So the first question I kind of wanted to ask was, what work do we do to make sure that we are capturing all of those kind of resident focus risks? I think the report says that we identify risks, but I don't know how we actually go about doing that and making sure we do capture all of those resident risks. it actually really became apparent to me in some of the work that with Lorna we've been doing in the consents working group, that particularly if you look about major infrastructure projects there, the council often thinks about them in terms of the risk to the council's road network in building East West Rail, whereas to me the risk is actually that, you know, the residents aren't well represented, that the East West Rail doesn't, you know, function for residents, that it's, you know, built incorrectly. And it's quite hard for the council, I think, sometimes to capture that risk and to figure out what its role is in representing that. So what work do we do in capturing all risks? The other bit that I just want to pick up on the base of what Stephen was saying, it's really good to hear about all of those exercises going on and the work in that. If I'm being honest with you, I don't know what our role in those major instances is as a member. And I'm not sure we're ever involved in those exercises. And I'm not sure what our role is and how we feed into those. I'm assuming in a major incident, the leader would be involved. But I'm not sure how, and I don't know how we can feed into those exercises and be involved, and what as members our role should be if there were a major incident.
I will come to Stephen, I think, on most of that. Just on the role of members, at the point where there is a critical incident, our role is to keep out of the way, because there are a whole, I mean, we are part of the communications function, but actually at the point at which people are moving around and managing stuff, being constantly rung up by me or anybody else is not helpful. So we just need to be really mindful about the phases of a critical incident. I'll let Stephen answer that, but I think I was trained young with my dad sailing boats that leaked a lot and got stuck, that sometimes the best thing you can do is just get out of the way. And we do need to remember that sometimes that's our job too. Stephen can respond on some of the other things. We definitely do have an important role in terms of communication, but that's a slightly different thing. I'll let Stephen respond. But
thank you, Chair. So agree with that. In law, under the Civil Contingencies Act, in the response phase, the reality is the role for elected members is very much defined as your community leadership role and a role around communications and informing and sharing messaging. It's very clear that in the response phase that the emergency management response, not just to this council but other local authorities, is the responsibility of officers. In fact, that's my statutory responsibility as the head of paid service. So that falls to me directly and then through me to the officer chain. The issue of elected individuals being involved in critical incidents, both at a local and national level, has been considered by government and in fact was looked at as part of the COVID pandemic inquiry and continues to be. And it has been very clear to date that whether councillors or indeed MPs, the involvement at local level in resilience and emergency planning matters is effectively, as the leaders outlined, community leadership and communication. When we come on to the response, beyond the response phase and into what's effectively known as the recovery phase, so once the initial incident's dealt with and we are then having to take longer term steps depending on the nature of what it is, then clearly elected members have a very important role, not just in terms of communication and community leadership, scrutinising the way that's being dealt with, making sure the approach is being embedded properly, whether that's in relation to a particular incident of, I don't know, say a chemical spill and what that does to the highways network, for example, and diversions. But the reality is it depends very much on the nature of the incident, but very clearly in law at this stage, the role of elected individuals, other than government ministers through the Cabinet Office Briefing Room A arrangements and the national emergency response decision-making that the Prime Minister or Secretaries of State may have to make, it's very much as the leaders outlined in terms of that community leadership, communication, information, and of course that's reliant on the officers who are managing the response, ensuring that members have the information they need to be able to share with the public. I would also just add that there is an emergency planning session as part of the member training plan, so it might be opportune to review some of those items there in more detail.
I'm just going to say one other thing, and then we probably do need to hurry this up a bit because we're at our 2-hour point and Michelle needs a break. There are definitely other roles for members other than don't get in the way. And some of those are to do with being kind of on the ground and listening to people. And some of those are also about flagging where something is going wrong. And there were certainly some occasions during COVID when that was an important role of members. So there are things that we do, but it's quite limited. Very quickly, Alex, and then I've got Lorna. And
No,
then
just
I'm
to-
hoping we can stop.
Totally agree on the community leadership and communications and that side of things as our role. I do wonder whether it would be prudent for us to be part of an exercise at some point and practice that, so we can all work out how to do that and not get in the way, because I think there is a tendency for us to try and get in the way, and to practice not getting in the way might be useful.
Yeah, two questions from me. Firstly, on that rising risk regarding partnership and collaborative working, which is obvious in terms of the massive time vampire that is local government reorganisation, but also the huge amount of turbulence currently going on in the ICB, which is a key partner in so many ways for us. And maybe other as well, because local government reorganisation will tear up all of the relationships that have been so carefully built in so many areas. And the outfall of that could well affect pretty much all of the other risks on here and escalate those, and also could do so quite quickly. And I'm wondering whether officers feel we have sufficient flexibility to be able to respond to rapid changes in that particular indicator, and how we manage that risk. Do officers feel confident that that is under sound management? And the second question is that there is no specific corporate risk around climate change, which is probably arguably one of the biggest risks that we as Cambridgeshire, as the country, as the planet actually face. And I don't see a specific risk on there, which surprises me. It shouldn't surprise me because I should have said something about it before, but I mean, it's odd given that the risk relating to climate and environmental failure is very general. It affects flood and water, which is the purview of Environment and Green Investment Committee. It, as we are already seeing, affects highways and transport, the rapid dilapidation of our roads due to environmental change. It affects public health in terms of the risk to health of the elderly and vulnerable from high temperatures and then low temperatures. And it affects external partners, such as operationally, potentially, how the fire authority sees the draw on its services, managing previously less frequent risks, such as the fires on very dry land that we saw last summer. So just wondering whether, given that it's not here as a corporate risk for our attention, but it's going to be so significant across everything we do, again, whether officers feel that the council is managing that risk in all of its cross-organisational aspects.
I think I'm going to Sue first on this one, if that's all right.
Thank you. So thank you, Councillor Dupre. Just picking up on the first point about are we ready and can we respond rapidly, then over the last 12 months we put some things in place, mechanisms in place to help us assess our partnerships. So we've done quite a lot of work in tracking who our key partners are, defining what a partnership means, how partnerships should be governed. We've also introduced an officer self-assessment, which we're carrying out now on an annual basis to assess the quality and effectiveness of those partnerships. And as part of that raising of awareness of both what constitutes a partnership and what an effective partnership is, I think we've seen officers with a greater confidence of understanding around that, and also then being able to escalate those discussions and raise those issues both in their service management teams and through their service directors into directorate management teams. And certainly within the corporate leadership team, one of the things that we do have at every corporate leadership team meeting is is where we speak without an agenda item around all the critical issues and wicked issues, we describe them. We do have wins as well, but we allow ourselves some wins, but wicked issues that are emerging week by week. And I think that's a very dynamic way in which we've been able to keep track of some of those changes and nuances, which absolutely can change within days. And I think providing that opportunity within the corporate leadership team and those discussions that then we discuss in our corporate leadership risk meeting is so the rescoring of this risk is a direct consequence of that. But I think that opportunity to look at those wicked issues on a weekly basis means that each of us as members of the corporate leadership team can take the issues that arise from that discussion back in with our teams to be able to respond and take action. So those are some of the kind of mechanisms and the things that we have in place in order to be able to respond dynamically to those changes in situation. Thank you. Stephen.
Chair, if I can perhaps come back to Councillor Dupre's second point around the climate change risk. Previously on the corporate risk register, we were reporting two separate risks. One was around the council's response as an organisation to climate change, which is still contained on the risk register. And then previously there was a more all-encompassing climate change risk that was around Cambridgeshire as a place. Members previously agreed to remove that risk because we were conscious that the risk register itself is about the role of the county council. And whilst we have a contributory role, absolutely correct, and can influence and inform, we weren't able to directly manage the risk in isolation, which is why we've just refined the risk to be about our role in dealing with climate change. However, our broader responsibilities are still encapsulated in the Council's climate change strategy and obviously broader targets through to 2045. Thank you.
Thank you. I think it's time to move to the end of this item, and I think we have been asked to comment and note the risk register, and I think we've definitely commented on it. I don't think we need to do more than that, do we, Michelle? So in which case are we happy to endorse the strategy? I think, and policies. Elliot?
I would like to abstain, please.
Noted. If everyone else is happy to endorse the strategy, that's very helpful. Actually, let's just vote on it. All those happy to endorse the strategy, if you could indicate now. All those wishing to vote against, all those wishing to abstain. Okay, have you got those, Michelle?
Yes, it's 10 votes in favour and 3 abstentions, so the motion's carried.
Thank you very much. We will have a pause now for 10 minutes. So if we could return at 12:20, that would be brilliant. Thank you. welcome back, everybody.
Yeah, absolutely.
I know I'm late, but I did bring them all in with me.
Thank you very much to those of you who were here on time. We will return to item 9. Is that correct? Is it the Treasury Management next? I missed something. No, it's the annual performance report, which actually is new and enormous. And are you? Is it you, Sue? Thank you.
Thank you very much. Yes, thank you, Chair. Yes, I am pleased to be able to bring to committee today the first annual performance report for the Council for 2024-25. Last October, this committee approved a new performance management framework, which included a change to the range of indicators this committee would see in future. And this change is reflected in this annual report. So not only is this the first annual report, you're also seeing the strategic key performance indicators from all the policy and service committees across the council. I say that because previously this committee would have just seen indicators from services that report into this committee. So now you've got an overview of performance across the council that corresponds with this committee's terms of reference. So from this point forward, you will be seeing performance reporting for the entire council in the same way as you've seen the overview of our finance today at today's meeting. And you've also just been involved in a discussion about our overview of risk and how risk is managed council-wide. So I'm really pleased that this marks a change, a step change in how we're reporting performance. So our finance, risk and performance is now being seen council-wide through this committee. And I'm also delighted to say, to support the discussion on this item, I'm joined by my fellow executive directors who are here to answer any of your questions, because it is quite an extensive report and there is a lot of detail in it. Thank you, Chair.
I'm slightly aware that councillors have been here for quite a long time discussing a number of other reports at length. Thank you for this report. I mean, I haven't looked at it this morning, but when I did look at it, it's really impressive and it's excellent to have it all laid out so clearly. Questions from people? Lorna.
Yep, I absolutely love this report. I think it's brilliant. And it has the potential, it seems to me, to align with and complement the work that comes out of the Quality of Life Survey. And seeing those two together, as well as the financial information, seems to me to be really valuable. And I'm just wondering how we can best facilitate making sure that all of that triangulation happens and how we see that overview. I'm a huge overview person. I can't see the little bits unless I can see the big bit, and this is really, really helpful in doing that. So how do we see ourselves monitoring those things in parallel and benefiting from the influence that each has on the other?
So, sorry, I'm going to refer to the past. So forgive me, members who are new to this committee. So certainly in the business planning cycle in the past, since we've had the Quality of Life Survey, we've certainly used the strategic framework, vision and ambitions, and then looked at what the Quality of Life Survey said, and then looked at where our finances are and our activity are. So actually triangulating all of that information I think is something we can take away to consider, because I think it's eminently possible. Now we have this kind of summary to be able to make that cross-reference between what our residents are saying through the Quality of Life Survey. And just to say, that survey is underway at the moment. It will conclude in July. So by mid-September, members will be able to see the latest information coming through year 3 of that survey. So absolutely, we'll take that way and look at how we can look at our performance, our finance, what residents are saying, and how we bring that whole picture together. Thank you.
Stephen, do you want to come in?
Thank you, Chair. Briefly, like the Deputy Leader, I quite like to triangulate and see things as a whole picture rather than just in stovepipes. So it's really helpful that the underpin to the performance management framework you approved in October of last year, excuse the managerial term, was around development of balanced scorecards for each of the council's directorates. In effect, what this committee needs to see in the longer term, because it takes quite a while to converge the various reporting, is finance, risk, performance, outcomes by way of resident feedback and employee feedback. And then really importantly, the other bit that we haven't previously reported to this committee but will be doing soon is what we would consider change to all of our major programs in terms of the effectiveness of their delivery. So that fully rounded picture that brings together quantitative and qualitative information and gives a really strong overview of the council's spend, the council's risks, the council's performance and outcomes for residents and indeed for its staff is hugely important. So I think, again, well-trodden management phrase, we've been on a journey around this for quite some time. It would be fair to say this first annual performance report for the whole council marks, as Sue says, a step change. It's something Sue will remember because I think she was the only other member of the CLT at the time. Sue knows I have been pressing for this for some time and I'm really pleased to see it. So I think like the Deputy Leader, I would suggest that more to be done, but actually this is quite a significant step forward in terms of finally having got here with an annual performance report so that this committee sees the entirety of our operations, not simply the ones that used to report into it. Thank you.
Thank you. Ross.
Thank you, Lucy. Just a bit of feedback to some extent. I think this is great what's in front of us, and it does set out very, very clearly where we are and where we're heading. Having the graphs a little bit bigger so that they're easier to read would be useful for one point. But the second point is we've currently got targets, but we don't have a tolerance level either. So, for example, or an intervention level, as it's called in other performance reports that I've seen from other authorities. So, for example, we've got long-term support needed for adults met by admission to residential and nursing care homes per 100,000 population. It says our target is 7.5. It says our current performance is 11.68. Is that within the tolerance that we're willing to accept? I think it'd be quite useful to know at what point do we need to be concerned as a council, as a committee, as a panel, and when you guys are actively intervening on those areas. So I don't know, moving forwards, if those targets can also be set and distributed within this pack, that'd be very useful.
Thank you. I think that's a really helpful feedback for us. Thank you.
Elisa.
So this was very, very interesting, and I really enjoyed reading it. And it's one of those reports, it's always a joy to get those. They're written in less officerese than reports normally are. And I would like to encourage people who are writing these things to always go in that direction if they can. In fact, make that an SKPI. I'm kidding. I think. Question number one, very basic. How frequently are we going to see this report, and how frequently is it going to be updated?
Thank you. So whilst obviously you'll see it in this format on an annual basis, on a quarterly basis going forward, all your quarterly information will now be reporting council-wide. And we will be moving in the reporting of that quarterly information to the, again, forgive the managerial speak, but the balanced scorecard. So a kind of representation of how our finance, our risk, the outcomes, our performance, how that's all looking in the round. So you will see a change in both the nature of what you're seeing because it's council-wide and how we're presenting that in accordance with the performance management framework which you approved last October. So that is now working through the system and you'll see it differently in this financial year.
So that's very good. My more specific question was about some of the statuses. I mean, some of the categories had a lot more contextual and or in development values than some other places. And I kind of have a working hypothesis to what that means. But I genuinely from the report struggled to get a meaning for that. So I was hoping that you would be able to describe it a bit better, and also whether there's any attempt to make that a bit more measurable, because at the moment there are some tables that are essentially contextual all the way through. Now, if there's a reason for that, obviously that's good for us to know, but we should probably make that a little bit more measurable if we could.
Yes, I mean, some indicators are simply the context we're operating in, and we're reporting on that context. But then they will be kind of complemented by other indicators that actually reflect the detail of what we are doing within that context. But I think, making the explanation clear, explaining why they're contextual, and also where we've got things in development. I mean, I have to say this is a very long document, and so we've obviously trimmed the information here to get it into the annual report. But I think actually having clear information to support what we're bringing before this committee on a quarterly basis is helpful to have that feedback. Thank you.
Thank you, Karen.
Thank you, Chair. I would also like to commend this report. We could spend all day talking about it. There's so much information in here. What struck me a lot was, just to pick one of the very many items we could talk about, is the changes in traffic flows across Cambridge. That's one of the concerns in my ward, certainly, in being on the edge of the city of Cambridge. And I note there's been a huge reduction, if I'm reading this correctly, in the amount of traffic. And given the growth in the city, I wondered whether anyone could comment perhaps on what is that a result of our good management and active travel promotion, and what's been the driver for that?
Frank is joining us.
Yeah, thank you for the question. I think one of the particular issues around the measures around cycling, walking and traffic flows is there was a reduction which we saw as a result of lockdown and linked to COVID. So that was a dynamic. I think overall, traffic flows are an area that we would see potentially increasing over time because of growth, particularly around the city, where there is significant growth in the future. But there's also a whole range of measures that we're putting in place to alleviate that potential congestion, such as promotion of active travel, working with the combined authority on what they're doing on public transport and reforms around buses in particular, and obviously looking at carefully around future highway design as well. So there's a number of contributing factors that lead to this. But again, as Sue's outlined, this is primarily provided for contextual information for this committee and also for Highways and Transport Committee to then inform what policy and measures they want to take in terms of improving traffic flow in the future, where that's appropriate for us to do that. Does that answer the question?
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you. I don't see any other. Ros, go on then.
Thank you. So yes, this is a document that I would love to share with the people in my division. I think what they would say initially is so there's two indicators which I struggle with. One is the percentage of category 1 and category 2 defects repaired in line with highways operating standards. Now, I think they would struggle to believe it was 88.3%. And then those who are imbued with the greatest detective skills would head off to report a fault, where they would see 300 live faults. And we all have divisions, and every division is going to be different to get a statistical average. But I think that it's really, I would love to know what the actual percentage was per division, because this is the most important sort of indicator for the people who shout at me, frankly. So I would really like more depth. And as an individual councillor, I would like to schedule a one-to-one with an officer to go through what it is for my division. I will add that I have actually sent an email to the email address where we're supposed to get a response within 10 days, and I haven't had a response. So I think it's things where you need that extra detail to have the trust to be able to support the work the council's doing. And at the moment, that's not there for me. The other indicator is, and I always ask about this in environment and green investment, is the percentage of premises in Cambridge and Peterborough with access to gigabit capable broadband. And it feels like this is an indicator where we don't know what we don't know. Where is the information coming from? Is it that the providers are providing us with, because do they even know? Because so we have people in Orchard Park who live on unadopted roads, and some of the providers say we can't give you fibre broadband, and others say we can. But if you call up the first one, then it doesn't matter whether you don't call up the second one, you will, like, it's a really complicated area. And I think particularly in lots of places, in a rural area, it just won't have got to you and there'll be a kind of firm no. Whereas in an urban area, it can be really complicated and that can just leave you, or it can be your housing association provider, which has got some reason why, you know, it can be done, but in 2 years' time. So this is an indicator that I really struggle with because, yeah, how do we get there with that indicator?
So I think there are two separate things there. Are they both under you, Frank, or are you going to do the first one?
I'll do both of those. Yeah.
Thank
So, so I think first of all, in terms of information around highway maintenance and highway performance, there's something that we are wanting to provide some revised indicators that we'll provide to the Housing and Transport Committee. So effectively, what we want to be able to provide assurance around is the condition of the highway, that the highway is inspected, and then the number of defects, and that they're repaired within the required timeframes. And we are tracking a lot of data, which is generally seeing the condition of the highway improving, the number of potholes reducing, and the response times improving. But doesn't mean that it's where it should be, but it's definitely a general position of improvement. And we do recognise that lots of members, if indeed all members, would like to have information on their local area in terms of highway performance. So that's outside of the committee reporting arrangements. What we're planning to do is provide each member with information for their local area in terms of known issues, performance in their area, and also planned works and planned maintenance schemes. So that's something we're planning to do just to make sure members get as much information as possible. On the broadband questions, so first of all, this has been raised at the Environment and Green Investment Committee already, and we've said that we'll provide a much more detailed report on, first of all, how we're reporting on digital connectivity. Most of those targets were set based on the government funding that we were allocated via the Combined Authority to deliver the previous Connecting Cambridgeshire programme. And given that we've now had a revised strategy agreed by the Combined Authority and a revised amount of funding, we are going to revisit the indicators there. So for the Environment Green Investment Committee, we'll provide a more detailed report on how digital connectivity is performing generally across the county area, and then further measures that we want to put in to reflect the revised strategy that's been agreed by the Combined Authority in the programme that's been delivered. But effectively, the target was set by government when we were allocated the funding to enable that access for gigabit capable broadband for those premises, and we've actually overachieved that target based on that government programme. So that's where the indicator comes from. There's been good performance, but I think there's been a reflection. Now we need to go further in terms of our digital connectivity. So a particular example of that would be where there's no connectivity whatsoever. So what we're doing around what's called not spots. So that's an area that we're now looking at in terms of the revised strategy, and therefore there will be an amended set of indicators to reflect that. Okay.
You're looking still doubtful, Ross. I'm sure people will be willing to answer other detailed questions. Alex, I think you had a question.
Question / comment, I think, if that's okay, Chair. So I think we could probably all spend all day talking about highway maintenance, and I would love to do that, but I don't think everyone else would do. So I'll try and keep this fairly short. I think the first thing I want to reflect on is to say as well, thank you very much for this data. And I think it's really important to show how far as a council we have come in data gathering and being data informed. I think that is a really big thing that this council has been working on, and the administration and the previous administration. I mean, when you look at highways, when I took over 3 years ago, we couldn't define what a pothole was. And to not have that data was incredibly difficult when it came to working with things. And I'm really, really pleased that the work that Frank and the team have been doing, particularly in highways, in building that data. I mean, it allowed us this year to really flatten the pothole curve. By looking at the data previously, we could see that in about January or February, there'd be a huge kind of spike in potholes, and it would decline down in May again. By seeing that data and being able to get ahead of it, this time round, we pretty much halved the number of potholes that we had outstanding. I know it might not feel like that on the network at times, and that is a problem that we need to get to, but the data is showing us that we're able to do that, and it's only by having the data that actually enables us to measure what we're doing. So that is so incredibly important. On Roz's point about the potholes, though, I think what is really key to note is that the vast majority of our potholes that are repaired are not public reports. there are inspectors going out and doing things. Whereas what the public really care about actually is the ones that they've reported. They're the ones that get the most attention. So we do need to do a piece of work looking at how we treat public reports of potholes, because obviously if somebody is reporting a pothole publicly, that means that it is very important to them. They have taken the time and the effort to be able to do that, and therefore we should reflect that. In general, though, this data is brilliant. The problem we have, I think, is that some of it is quite laggy. We obviously have the quality of life survey that really helps us, but is, a year out of date. We're actually now, for everyone that gets one through the letterbox, we're about to be doing the National Highways survey again. So that'll be going out this month to 3,000 people. But again, that lags behind slightly. So I don't know whether in the future it's possible to draw out on this which kind of indicators are up to date and that we can, look at as being a really current reflection, and which ones might have a slight lag in them. So we need to look at things. Obviously, again, within highways, the administration has put in such a big investment this year that we will be hopefully seeing an improvement in road quality, but we won't see that in the data probably for a year or two in the data that we're seeing here. So we need to really identify which of the indicators that are the canaries that we can see right now and actually give us a real true indication, and which ones are going to be slightly further behind. And I don't know whether we can kind of pull that out in the future to allow us to really have that information.
Thank you, Chair. Really helpful comments and question from Councillor Beckett. There's a couple of things to observe. One is I would love us to be in the position of having not only hindsight or indeed real-time insight, but actually a bit of foresight would be quite helpful. That being said, local government is not so easy to forecast, but nonetheless, I think the point is well made. So if there is a way for us to look at how we can better develop and advance our use of performance information and metrics and data, including potentially the exploitation of artificial intelligence and other forms of technology to help make that more useful. Of course, predictive analytics are something we should be looking at, and certainly for some parts of our operations, that's something we will further look at. Having had work in this place around health and social care and smart homes previously in another place, it's very possible. But of course, then there's the question of capacity and investment. So I'm not disputing the points. I think they're well made, and I actually agree with them. So it's something we can and should look into. The point I was going to follow up on, however, Chair, was I understand government are about to launch the new local government outcomes framework, which will be the national reporting framework for all local authorities. So what I'm trying to balance is how much we can do locally within the capacity we have and service at the same time the new requirements that government are about to set all authorities on reporting. For those of us that have been in this meeting previously in the former administration, we were all relatively happy to see the demise of what was the Office for Local Government and what felt like a whole swathe of national performance indicators. I understand there will be a new outcomes framework for the whole sector, probably announced by the Deputy Prime Minister next week at the Local Government Association conference, that we'll need to understand and look at in terms of what that does to our ability to report and the capacity it will require from us. So absolutely agree with Councillor Beckett around better use of data, and we've come some way. We can go a lot further. Thank you.
Alex.
Through you, Chair, can I just add a quick follow-up to that? I know government is now again requesting that we publish a lot more data about potholes and road maintenance ourselves. One of the big issues with that is, and all of the relevant transport leads that I've spoken to have raised the same issue, is that again, they have not defined what a pothole is. So every single local authority might well be defining it in a slightly different way and giving very different data. Do we have any confidence in what you're saying there, that government might be standardizing the reporting, or is there any way we can feed into that? Because I see this as a problem across the board.
Sorry, Chair, message flashed up at the same time, confused my small brain. The answer to the question is yes, there has been some opportunity to feed into the local government outcomes framework, but the reality is, as with all these top-down things from government, ultimately they are designed by civil servants and signed off by ministers. So I have been involved in some of the work to help inform it. I cannot for one moment tell you with any certainty that they have defined what a pothole is. But there will be a set of outcomes they expect all councils to be reporting against that have effectively been drawn from each of the main spending departments. So I would hope in that context the Department for Transport may have worked out what a pothole is by now. But I live in hope. Thank you.
Thank you. Ross.
Thank you very much. And through you, Chair, it'll be a question probably for Martin. Obviously, it's very concerning to see the percentage of EHCPs, which is Educational Health and Care Plans, completed within the 20-week statutory timeframe. Obviously, the year before last, it was at 29.96%. Last year, it's down to 9.09%, which is a huge difference. I was wondering if you can give us an overview on what happened in that year, what you're doing to improve it, and when we're likely to see in these indicators an improvement. A small improvement is better than no improvement, but some improvement in those numbers.
Thank you. As you all know, the demand for SEND services is a national issue. We've spoken about it earlier in this meeting, and it continues to be the case. We've seen continued increase in demand for children who meet the eligibility criteria for an education healthcare needs assessment, and then nearly all of those children will go on to need a subsequent plan because the eligibility criteria are relatively broad. However, our Inclusion for All strategy, which was endorsed by the Ofsted CQC inspection in January this year, aims to address some of these systemic issues, and we are developing a workforce plan which will see us redesign how we deliver those services. We are also hopeful that the government's planned reforms will address some of the issues for us and help us to improve. I'll give you an example. Each of those assessments and plans need to have the oversight and input from an educational psychologist. There are simply not enough educational psychologists. We have a full-time equivalent cohort of 19, but because there are not enough, we have about 12 vacancies, 11 vacancies. So whilst we're constantly looking to recruit educational psychologists, you can see that there will every month be a shortfall, and that is building up a backlog. Now, what we take, that's important because it impacts on the deliverability of the timeliness of assessments, because what we adopt actually is a risk-based approach. So children within that backlog that are coming up to a key phase change, if they become looked after or if there's another significant event in their lives, then they will be accelerated through the process. Now, that will slow it down for some children, but it means that children, as they're coming up to key parts of their life, they will be prioritised, whilst acknowledging that most of those children will have a delayed assessment. We are hopeful that the changes that are going to be announced by the government at some stage will have a positive impact on that. For example, if they released the need for an educational psychologist to overview all of those assessments and reserve that for the children with the most complicated needs, that will be extremely helpful. We're also hopeful that our redesign will put some additional capacity in other areas where it's needed. The administration, not just the assessment by the professionals, but the administration of pulling those reports together is quite lengthy and complex, as information comes from multiple different sources. So if our redesign can address some of those business support issues, if you like, to pull those together, then that will also improve our timeliness. But I think whilst we have this issue of a backlog, adopting a risk-based approach is probably a sensible way forward. But we are ever hopeful that the things that we're doing and the national things together will have an impact.
And just to two parts really, just push back slightly. Do you have a date and when we're likely to see improvements? Are you saying that we're going to see improvements within 3 months, 6 months, 12 months? Are we looking at 2 years down the line before we see improvements in these numbers? Is the first part. The second part, I think it would be useful if we, talking about the backlog, it would be useful for us to see what the maturity is of that backlog. Because I'm aware of certain cases within Huntingdonshire that are 56 weeks overdue. I know of some that are only a couple of weeks overdue, but we don't know from what we've got in front of us where the actual numbers on the maturity of some of those waiting to be approved or denied as it may be. So I think it'd be useful if we could get some form of table that sets out what the maturity is of the backlog and the risk associated to that.
In answer to your first question, your first supplementary question, I wouldn't want to give you a date by which you're going to see a significant improvement. I don't think I can give you that with confidence. Whilst we're continuing to see the demand go up at between 12 and 20% each year, it would be hard to give you that reassurance, especially as we are adopting that risk-based approach where we take children out of the process and give them provide them with their assessment at a different stage, rather than just addressing it from the front and the back at the same time, if you see what I mean. We're addressing children's needs as they arise. We probably could provide a report outside of this meeting which looks at the overall timeliness of children in the backlog. So I will find out about that and get back to you.
Martin, can I just follow up on that? My understanding, and correct me if I'm wrong, is that for a number of children who are on that waiting list, we are also assessing them and making sure that they're getting some support, even if it's not through the EHCP and having had a psychology assessment. So I think if we could have that briefing note with the information that Ros has suggested, but also with some other information about what we're doing to make sure that children and families are getting some support, even if it's not the EHCP assessment that they've asked for, that would be helpful.
Yes, I mean, I just want to, yes, I agree. Most of those children will be getting additional support anyway, whilst they're in that process. I completely agree with you. Yep.
Stephen, did you want to come in as well?
Chair, just very briefly, building on what Martin said, as part of the Inclusion for All framework, which is obviously under the purview of the Children and Young People's Committee, that programme has 18 specific key performance indicators that are reviewed on an ongoing basis. So I think if we can build those into the briefing note Martin's committee to offer members of this committee, that would be helpful. Whilst that doesn't track every single area of SEND activity, it does cover a whole range of the issues that are encapsulated within the framework. So I think it would be helpful to see the progress against those 18 key performance indicators that members have previously agreed as well. Thank you.
Thank you. And thank you for raising that, Ros. It's a really important point. Alison.
Thank you. Actually covered off most of what I actually wanted to say, but I also want to say thank you for this report, because this really does help set out an awful lot. And thank you to Highways for the fact that New Barnes area now has got rid of a huge amount of the problems on the roads. So thank you for getting that done. On page 235, the tables at 3.4 and 3.5, I find them very useful to look at a sort of umbrella view of what's on here. And I'm just wondering whether it would be beneficial to actually have the same data for each of the areas set out within the report, just within this table as well, so we could almost at a glance assess the ones that need perhaps a little bit more attention overall.
I think that's a yes. Thank you. Thank you very much. Just as a final comment, so I think there's been almost universal agreement about how valuable this is. There are lots of things to discuss about services which are doing well and services which aren't, and all sorts of interesting things flagged up by the data. The final thing that I want to say is that I think some of this data will be really important and useful for some of our partner organisations. So I hope we are sharing it with them and making sure that they are also able to use it and access it, because particularly with the Highways stuff and the stuff on skills, I know that those ought to be being used by the combined authority, and it would be important that people are, I mean, this is extremely useful data in a mostly very usable format, so if we're sharing it with them, that would be helpful. Good. I think, are we noting this one? Let me just have a look. So I think we have noted it. Thank you very much indeed for that. And we will move on now to the Treasury Management Outturn report. But thank you very much to all of the executive directors for all the work that's gone into that annual report. I think it will also be very helpful, as Lorna suggested, as we go into our budget setting process. We can use that alongside the quality of life work. So thank you very much indeed. Stephen.
Thank you, Chair, and hello again, everybody. So this report sets out the detailed Treasury management position for the Council as at the end of 24-25. I'm already in the jargon there. I appreciate. I'm sorry. It's very hard to escape the jargon in what is quite a regulated area of the Council's activity. To try to boil it down, the report, and it's a regular report that you'll see and hopefully become familiar with and receive training on, but it's regarding the management of the Council's cash, the Council's borrowing, and the Council's investments, in this case, over the 24-25 financial year. Just trying to put it in the context of the services. The Council borrows money to fund capital spend, which is predominantly on schools and infrastructure. We hold cash to meet our day-to-day spending commitments for all services. And we have historically made several investments to generate revenue returns and reduce the need for savings. The best heads up sort of way to look at the situation for members is the table on 3.2, which is page 279, which is the prudential indicators. These are sort of national requirement in terms of indicator formats. We set the values in the indicators annually through the Treasury Management Strategy at full Council. And you'll see from those that the Council was generally in compliance with those indicators for the year, with explanations provided for the variances from them. Turning briefly just to the Council's borrowing position, we report through the report that the Council's net borrowing for the year rose to close to £780 million. The Council borrows such large sums, as I say, to fund the extensive capital programme that we have, schools, highways, infrastructure, etc., the lives of which can stretch to 35, 40, 50 years in some cases. So it's about long-term investment. Increasingly, the burden for that investment is falling on councils as government funding for capital has shrunk over the years. Committee will see from the report the Council continues to generally take out shorter-term debt when refinancing is required or when new borrowing is required to try to reduce our long-term exposure to what are currently quite high interest rates. The cost of borrowing for the Council is fundamentally driven by the global economic picture and is very difficult to proactively manage. Finally, then, just the Council's Treasury investments are generally performed well in the year due to those same high interest rates, though we've reduced down the cash balances that we're holding to really minimise the level of debt financing we're having to take out. The report gives some detailed information about our collective investment funds as well, from which dividends continue to perform well, and lists the institutions with whom the Council has deposits and our approach to managing the cash we have at hand in the year. I'll leave the intro there. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much. Any questions on this one? Ross.
Thank you, Lucy, and thank you very much for the report. I know from district these can always be very, as you said, heavy on jargon and sometimes difficult to unpick. I was just wondering, do we have limits on our counterparties, and are they set by members and come through members and through SRMP, or are they is that a responsibility delegated to our Treasury management team?
So we do have limits on counterparties, yes. I can't remember. I think they might be set out in the report, but certainly they're set out in the Treasury Management Strategy, and they're agreed in the Treasury Management Strategy by full Council on an annual basis. There is a delegation in there to the Section 1 officer to vary that in exceptional cases, usually where there's very attractive interest rates with a particular low risk bank. So, and that would any variation to that would be reported back through this committee. So yeah, it's sort of set locally by members.
And just a second question, again, I can't see it in this report, it may be in the strategy, but how do we monitor the credit ratings for those counterparties and any other investments that we hold or any other accounts that we hold?
So one of the main things to bear in mind first is that the hierarchy of the Council's approach to its investments really prioritise security above everything else. So generally the counterparties that we invest cash with are names that you'd recognise. They're quite low risk institutions, and to help advise the Council on this, the Council has a retained Treasury Management Advisor, which most councils have a similar sort of service they buy into that provides regular provides sort of live monitoring of the credit ratings of any institutions that its supported councils will invest with. So really, we've got sort of that backup from a real expert external party to advise if there are any issues on the horizon.
Excellent. Thank you. I don't see any other questions on this, which is often the case with this one. It's very important that it is reported to us. Thank you very much indeed, Stephen. I think it's noted. I don't think we need to vote on it.
Sorry, Chair, just to endorse it up to full council for
Okay,
review.
sorry, we do. Fine. In that case, can I see all those happy to endorse it to go up to full council? Thank you. I think that's unanimous. Thank you very much indeed. Thank you, Stephen. We now move on to item 10, which is the committee agenda plan, training plan, and appointments to outside bodies. I think we may manage to get some of the appointments to outside bodies, but probably not all of them today. And I'm sorry, Michelle, I should have brought more of them to you before the meeting. But I'll hand over for some of the other stuff to you.
Thank you, Chair. So Appendix 1 sets out your agenda plan and you have a reserve meeting scheduled for September if you need it, if the business requires. Then moving to Appendix 2, you do have a significant training plan. There's at least 12 items identified. I do realise the pressure on members at the moment. I think we've sort of booked out the majority of lunchtimes in July for training and briefing. And we do need to perhaps factor in a less intense pressure on you for that. So we will look and see how we can actually place some of this training. It doesn't all need to be done by the end of the year, just to reassure you. And then we move to Appendix 3, which is the appointments to outside bodies. I'll go through the ones that we are aware of. The growth company is the requirement for the leader. Just to confirm for ESPO that Councillor Clark has withdrawn his interest in that due to availability, so we have a vacancy there. For the Wisbech Neighbourhood Board, Councillor Hoy is proposed. And for the Member Development Panel, we have a proposal for Councillor Lowe, and for the Waste Member Steering Group for Councillor Martin. Probably in relation to that, we can probably approve the ones we're aware about. There is a delegation to the Chief Exec to work with the Chair and Vice Chair to complete the other appointments. And we also have 2 member champions, and I've put, that's on Appendix 5, and I've put down who was previously the champions. So there might be a need for some continuity. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much. And thank you to Ros for those. Ross, I think you put some in, we communicated. There are some other ones that we could add, I believe. So the member development, but quite a lot of it, I think that we can cover in spokes meetings. So just to go back to the training plan, Michelle, if it's all right with you, I think we might have a look at that in the spokes meeting and decide which ones we think are more urgent and which ones are a bit less urgent. But I think probably it's better to do that in the spokes meeting than here. Looking at the outside bodies, I think the Cambridge Bid Board, I think it might be difficult to do today because I think there might be 2 members from our group who are interested. ESPO, if there's anybody from another group who would like to do that, please speak now. Otherwise, we will find somebody, but it would be interesting to know if there was. And Councillor Wyatt can tell you that it's very interesting. I think probably I've had a message from Councillor Sanderson, but I haven't managed to listen to it because it was during the meeting. If he's happy to continue on the Huntingdon Bid Board, I'm happy for that to be the case, as he's done that for a long time. Councillor Hoy, we've settled. The Member Development Panel, I have 3 volunteers, in inverted commas, from the Liberal Democrat group who are happy to do that. And I would suggest that for the other 4 places, if the other parties would like to nominate to those places. Okay, Elisa, you're down. Excellent. Just to say that's not usually a great deal of time requirement. And I'll let you know the Lib Dem members for that one at the end of the meeting. I'm sorry not to have done it before. Waste, I think Lorna, you were happy to continue on that one. I think Lorna's an SR&P nomination to that one. For the other 3, I'm quite keen to try and remind myself about who's already been appointed to make sure that we've got kind of coverage across parties and geography if we possibly can. Ros.
So I spoke to Jenna about we suggested that we split it by offering it to the different groups across the committees, but I can't remember what the offer was. But I think Jenna, no, if you liaise with Jenna Herron, she would.
So we'll pick up on that, and if Elisa is the Labour rep on that, that would be fine. But we'll go away and check on that one. And I've got to the bottom. Hooray! Michelle, is there anything else you want to ask about it?
No, I think the best thing, as you quite rightly say, is if we bring it to spokes, then we can finalise it all. Yeah.
Yes, Elisa.
I have a teeny tiny nit to pick, and this is probably something I've never spotted in all these years. And once I've spotted it, I was unable to unspot it. So this is on the agenda forward plan. So today we looked at the, hang on a second, because now I need to say it properly. So today we looked at the Integrated Finance Monitoring Report for 2 different periods, depending on the financial year to which they pertain. Now, the period is described differently in the various ones that are coming up, and also it's called the management rather than monitoring report. Can we just make sure people know what we're talking about, because otherwise I will get confused.
Chair, if I can come back, that's probably my fault. Finance have come up with a new whizzy name of titling it and sorting it, and I haven't caught up yet, so I will do and change the agenda plan to reflect that.
No, that's fine. Just making sure whatever it is, and I don't really think it makes a difference, that it's the same throughout, and also that we consistently say what the dates or call it period 3, period A, F, whatever. But it's just otherwise I will genuinely not know where to look. Other than that, thank you.
Thank you, Elisa. It's always good to know that members are reading everything carefully. Thank you very much. Okay, I think that's the end of the items on the agenda for today. So thank you very much for your time and your patience and your excellent scrutiny. I think these committees are both decision making and scrutiny, and I think we've done an excellent job of scrutiny this morning. So thank you all for your time. And if I don't see, and I will see you all before the summer because we've got full council. Thank you very much indeed. And I declare the meeting closed.